Welcome to Dark Breathing, where doors close and silence begins. Before you surrender to the feeling of relaxation, if you find a sanctuary in our stories, feel free to support our channel with a like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, from which corner of the world are you listening tonight? And what does the hour feel like for you right now? These small details make us a true community. If you'd like to be the main character in one of my upcoming stories, just leave a comment with your name and the role you'd like to play. Do you want to be the hero who saves everyone? The villain? Or perhaps even the devil himself? So, subscribe to the channel and wait for your name in the next story. You'll find only a few ads in the first 15 minutes, then everything vanishes. After that, nothing will interrupt your journey into calm. I hope you give this experience a chance, for I am certain you won't find stories quite like these anywhere else. Now, dim the bright lights. Let the gentle hum of a water or the whisper of distant rain surround you, and don't let the thunder frighten you. Let's begin the journey. Scary Story 1. The Red-Eyed Ride. In the summer of 2014, in a small farming community in the Pacific Northwest, I was spending my break from college, helping my dad on his ranch. He was primarily a cattleman, and the work was constant. Every day, one of our key chores was to check on the herd, ensuring they were fed, accounted for, and healthy. That particular Saturday, my other responsibilities piled up, pushing the afternoon checkup later than usual. It was already 3 p.m. when I finally saddled up my horse, Maverick. A shortage of grazing land on our property meant we were leasing a distant pasture, making the ride out there a solid hour-long journey. The trip there was uneventful. I located the herd, counted heads, and everything seemed fine. By 5:30, the sun was beginning to cast long, deep shadows through the tall pines. I started the trek back, lulled by the steady rhythm of Maverick's gait. About 30 minutes from home, a profound and sudden chill gripped me. It wasn't just a breeze. It was an unnatural, icy wave that washed over my body. I'd always been a skeptic, but in that instant, a primal, undeniable certainty flooded my mind. Something was very wrong. As if on cue, Maverick tensed beneath me. He was a gentle, dependable gelding, but now he began to fight the reins, his ears flicking wildly, his coat twitching as if covered in flies. He started to sidestep violently, pressing against the edge of the narrow trail, his entire body screaming a desire to bolt. I leaned forward, using all my strength to hold him steady, my knuckles white on the leather reins. It was then that my head involuntarily snapped to the right. There, just a few yards away, a solid black silhouette stood beside a dilapidated wooden fence. It was man-shaped, but utterly featureless, a hole of deeper darkness in the shadowy undergrowth. before my mind could even process it. The figure didn't run or leap. It simply vanished. The moment it disappeared, a huge section of the dry thicket where it had been standing erupted in a violent, crashing tremor, as if a great weight had fallen through it. There was no sound of footsteps, no animal cry, just the deafening crunch of breaking branches that ceased as abruptly as it started. In that same heart-stopping second, a sharp, electric numbness shot through my hands from the force I was exerting on the reins. Freed from my grip, Maverick unleashed a panicked scream and launched into a frantic, blind gallop. All I could do was cling to the saddle horn, ducking low to avoid whipping branches. The world, a terrifying blur of motion and sound. After what felt like an eternity, Maverick's wild sprint slowed to a trembling, sweat-lathered walk. I slid from the saddle, my own legs shaking, and stumbled toward a nearby creek to splash water on my face. As I cupped the cool water, a searing, unbearable pain ignited in my eyes. It felt like I had rubbed raw chili peppers directly into them, a burning agony that came out of nowhere. When I finally made it home and got Maverick settled, I walked into the kitchen. My mom took one look at me, and her face fell. "My God, Alex, what happened to your eyes?" I tried to brush it off, blaming the sweat and dust from the ride. But she insisted, her voice tight with alarm, and guided me to the hallway mirror. I recoiled in horror. My eyes were no longer my own. They were completely filled with blood. Two solid orbs of vivid, terrifying crimson. There wasn't a speck of white left. It looked as though I had been crying tears of pure blood. The fear that shot through me was immediate and absolute. I knew with a chilling certainty that this was connected to the black silhouette. A visit to the doctor provided no answers. He found no medical explanation, no infection, no burst blood vessels that should have caused this. No medication he prescribed had any effect. For 2 long months, I lived with those blood-red eyes, a constant, unsettling reminder of that evening. When I told my mom and my older brother Mark the full story, they were speechless. The next day, Mark, a hardened and practical man, went back to the spot to investigate. He returned looking unnerved. He told me there were no tracks, no broken branches, no sign of any large animal or person having been there. The undergrowth was completely undisturbed, as if the violent crashing I had heard was nothing but an illusion. He even took water samples from the creek, which later tested negative for any irritants. It's been 8 years. The memory is as vivid as if it happened yesterday. I have never ridden back to that part of the leased land. Maverick, my brave and loyal partner, who shared that terrifying experience with me, passed away last year. I miss him deeply, and it saddens me that he was the only other soul who witnessed what happened on that red-eyed ride. Scary Story 2: The Wrong House. It was March 2009. The events that unfolded that night are burned into my memory. a terrifying blur between 3 and 4 a.m. I was 17 at the time, and our family was under a cloud of worry. My grandmother's health was failing in the hospital, and things weren't looking good. My family from out of state, my Aunt Carol, Uncle David, and my 2 younger cousins had flown in to be with us, just in case. Our house in a quiet suburb of Portland is a large 3-story home, but with the sudden influx of family, it felt cramped and crowded. I remember being annoyed at the lack of privacy and personal space, but after that night, I was profoundly thankful for every single person under that roof. The night it happened, the house had finally fallen silent. All the lights turned out as everyone retreated to their beds. My bedroom is on the middle level, and I've always been a night owl. I was up late on my laptop, headphones on, watching videos. The clock had just passed 3 a.m. when a sound tore through the silence. A tremendous, violent bang at the front door. Even with my music playing, it was deafeningly clear. This wasn't a knock. It was a full-force, relentless pounding, as if someone was trying to break the door down. I leapt from my bed and dashed into the hallway, where I almost collided with my dad and Uncle David. Their faces were etched with a mixture of sleep and utter confusion. At 17, I was already a big guy, a varsity football player, and my dad knew I could handle myself. Without a word, we made a silent pact to investigate. We crept down the stairs. Our house has a motion-sensitive alarm, and as we reached the halfway point, the high-pitched siren began to wail. The keypad to disable it was right next to the front door, the source of the terrifying banging. My dad moved quickly, his fingers fumbling on the pad to silence the alarm. As the screeching stopped, he shouted through the solid wood door, his voice booming with a forced anger. "Who is it?" In response, a car pulled into our driveway, its high beams flooding the front door with a blinding white light. Our door has small, decorative glass panels, but they're frosted, and the sudden glare made it impossible to see anything outside. We heard several male voices yelling to each other, but their words were a muddled, aggressive noise. My blood ran cold. I sprinted into the kitchen, yanked a large chef's knife from the block, and decided to check the back garden. I braced myself, fully expecting to see an intruder. When I pulled back the blind, my heart plummeted into my stomach. I saw 2 men running from left to right across our lawn, darting behind the conservatory and out of sight. Knife in hand, I ran back to my dad and uncle. "There are men in the back garden," I hissed. That's when we noticed the car lights in the front were now flashing on and off erratically. And then we saw him, the shadowy, distorted outline of a tall man standing directly against the glass panel of the front door. He began kicking and pounding on the door again with renewed fury. The entire frame shuddered. I was convinced it was going to splinter into pieces. My dad shouted, "The police are on their way! Get out of here before you're caught!" My uncle, Thinking strategically, moved from the hall into the dining room, which offered a better view of the side of the conservatory. He got there just in time to see a booted foot disappear upwards. "They're on the roof!" he yelled, before sprinting back upstairs. My bedroom is directly above the conservatory, but the wall is sheer. There was no way to climb it. My uncle reasoned they must have jumped back down, but he was wrong. My two cousins were sleeping in a top-floor room with a large, slanted window facing the back garden. Somehow, one of the men had scaled all the way up and was now attempting to smash that very window directly above where my cousins slept. Terrified, my cousins burst out of their room just as my uncle arrived. Seeing the shadowy figure against the glass, my uncle didn't hesitate. He unlocked the window and with a massive heave, sent it flying outward. The force knocked the man sideways on the steep, rain-slicked roof. He lost his footing, slipped, and then scrambled to the edge, launching himself into the large oak tree at the side of our house. Clearly, his original method of ascent. Back downstairs, the chaos reached a fever pitch. We could now hear what sounded like 4 or more men shouting a name, demanding someone. I can't remember the name they were screaming, but my dad kept yelling back, "You have the wrong house! You have the wrong family!" They didn't listen. Suddenly, a car horn started blaring repeatedly from the driveway, as if it were a pre-arranged signal. The shouting stopped. The banging ceased. We listened to the sound of frantic footsteps retreating across the gravel, car doors slamming, and an engine roaring away into the night. Everyone was left shaking and on edge, but in the dead of that rainy night, there was nothing more we could do. We eventually trudged back upstairs, our nerves shot. The following morning, after the police had come and taken our statements, we inspected the outside of the house. At first, it seemed we had only suffered a few scuff marks on the door and some muddy footprints. But then, we made more disturbing discoveries. Hidden in the bushes of the back garden were several smashed glass bottles, their jagged edges pointing upwards, deliberately stashed as if for a later purpose. Most chilling of all, we found a slightly outdated floor plan of our house, one that didn't include the recently added conservatory, and with it, a faded photograph of a family I didn't recognize. A circle was drawn in ink around the face of a man who looked to be in his late 20s. My first thought was the previous owners, but I knew our house's history, and these people were strangers to it. They definitely had the wrong house and the wrong family. We were safe, but a cold dread settled over me. I can only hope, wherever they are, that the family in that photograph is safe too. Scary Story 3: The Man Who Never Smiled. A few years back, I agreed to a date with a man I'd met online. Looking back, the red flags were there from the beginning. But I convinced myself I was just being judgmental. His name was Mark, and our digital conversations were dry, He never once typed "lol," used an emoji, or acknowledged any of my jokes. He was intensely serious, but we shared several niche interests in literature and film. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was just better in person. Having had my share of creepy encounters, I'm a firm believer in safety protocols. Before leaving, I messaged my best friend, Chloe. I gave her every detail: the restaurant we were meeting at, his full name, the make and model of his car, and even a screenshot of his dating profile. I felt prepared. The restaurant was a quaint Italian place, which seemed normal enough, but it was situated right at the head of a popular hiking trail. I remember thinking that was an odd choice for a first date. Any hope I had that his personality would warm up in person evaporated within minutes. Throughout our meal, my attempts at humor were met with a chilling response. Every time I laughed or made a joke, he would stop moving entirely, fork hovering mid-air, and fix me with a blank, unblinking stare. His eyes were the most unsettling part. They were cold and glassy, like the eyes of a storefront mannequin, completely devoid of light or emotion. Then he started talking about his work as a software architect. He didn't just describe his job. He launched into a bitter monologue about how his colleagues were intellectual inferiors who consistently slighted him. He believed he deserved a leadership position far beyond his current role, because he was, in his words, simply smarter than everyone else. My internal alarm system was screaming now. All the classic psychopathic warning signs: grandiosity, a pervasive sense of grievance, and a total lack of empathy were on full display. His facial expression never changed. No smile, no frown, just that impassive mask and those predatory eyes. When the bill came, he suggested we go for a walk on the trail. My blood ran cold. I forced a smile and said I needed to use the restroom. Once inside the stall, I called Chloe, my voice a hushed, panicked whisper. I need an out, now. We had a pre-arranged plan for this exact scenario. She was going to call me back in 10 minutes with a fake emergency. I should have just climbed out the bathroom window and run. But a misguided sense of politeness held me back. I felt bad for ditching him. It's a feeling I still regret. When I returned, we started down the main trail. It was still relatively busy with other hikers, which gave me a small sense of security, but that feeling was short-lived. He repeatedly tried to steer me off the paved path, pointing into the dense woods. I found an amazing spot earlier, just off this way. The view is incredible. He was far too familiar with the unmarked offshoots. My panic surged from a worry to a full-blown fight-or-flight response. I quickly typed an SOS to Chloe. She called back instantly, her voice loud enough for me to pretend she was on speaker. Sarah, my car just died outside the grocery store. I need you to come get me right now. I delivered the excuse, feigning concern. Oh no, Chloe, of course. I'm on my way. Mark's reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. The first real emotion I had seen all night flickered across his face. Frustration. Then a flash of anger. "Why does she need you?" he demanded, his voice tight. We drove separately. "Let's both go meet her. I can help." The suggestion was absurd and invasive. Why would he need to meet my stranded friend? I started backing away toward the main, populated trail. "No, it's fine, really. I'll handle it." I didn't wait for another argument. I turned and walked as fast as I could without breaking into a run, feeling his gaze on my back. When I dared a final glance, he was still standing there, watching me. The anger was gone, replaced once more by that vacant, dull-like stare. He didn't follow me to the parking lot. I drove home with shaking hands. I don't know if Mark was genuinely dangerous or just a profoundly awkward and unsettling individual. But the primal fear that coiled in the pit of my stomach that night was the most powerful instinct I've ever felt. It told me to run, and I've never been more grateful that I listened. So what do you think? Was I overreacting, or was my gut trying to tell me something I desperately needed to hear? Scary Story 4: The Third Floor Shift. For about a year, I worked as a substitute custodian for a local school district. My job was to fill in for the full-time janitors at various schools whenever they were out. My responsibilities were straightforward: clean an assigned section of the building and secure it for the night. The story I'm about to tell happened during one of my final months on the job. I was called in to cover for a sick custodian at Harrison Middle School. Now, Harrison had a reputation. The main building was pushing a century old and had once served as the only school in the county, housing every grade from 1st to 12th. With that much history, ghost stories were inevitable. The third floor in particular was infamous among the staff. People reported hearing unexplained footsteps, disembodied voices, and the occasional slamming door. To my dismay, when I arrived for the evening shift, the head custodian, a gruff man named Ray, assigned me to clean that very third floor. "Just get the classrooms and bathrooms done," he said. "You'll be fine." He was working on the ground floor, which meant I would be completely alone up there. It was already 8 p.m., and the building was locked to the public. The silence was profound, broken only by the hum of the aging fluorescent lights and the echo of my own cart. I worked quickly, trying to shrug off the creeping unease. For the first hour, everything was normal. I swept, emptied trash cans, and wiped down boards, my focus solely on finishing the job and getting out. As I rounded the corner to the final hallway of classrooms, I heard it. Clear as day. It was the sound of a little girl's laughter, light and melodic, echoing from somewhere nearby. My blood ran cold. I froze, my grit tightening on the push broom. Every instinct told me to run, but my duty was to ensure the building was empty and secure. Swallowing my fear, I called out, my voice shaky in the vast silence. "Hello, is someone there? The building is closed." No answer. Only the heavy silence returned. My heart hammering against my ribs, I began a thorough search. I checked every single classroom, my eyes scanning the dark corners. I tried every window to confirm they were locked. Finding nothing, I moved toward the girls' and boys' restrooms at the end of the hall. That's when I heard the second sound. It was the unmistakable rhythm of footsteps, small, quick and light, running directly toward me from the hallway I had just left. The sound grew louder, closing the distance in a matter of seconds. I spun around, bracing myself to see an intruder. The hallway was utterly empty. The long, polished linoleum floor stretched out, vacant and silent. The footsteps had stopped the very instant I turned. That was all the confirmation I needed. I didn't wait for a third sign. In record time, I threw my cleaning supplies onto the cart, abandoned my methodical routine, and practically flew down the 2 flights of stairs to the safety of the main floor. I found Ray in the boiler room. Breathlessly, I told him what had happened. He just nodded slowly, unsurprised. "Yeah, people have complained about that before," he admitted with a shrug. "I didn't say anything 'cause I didn't want to spook you. Never heard it myself, though." I had to clean that 3rd floor a few more times before I left the job. But I never again experienced anything like that night. But to this day, the sound of that innocent, disembodied laughter and those phantom footsteps running toward me in the dark remains one of the most chilling experiences of my life. Scary Story 5: The Hitchhiker's Instinct. Let me preface this by saying this story isn't mine. You can choose to believe it or not, but I know my father is not a man who fabricates tales. This is his story, one he's told and retold over the years, and it chills me to the bone every single time. It was the early 1970s in a suburban town just outside of Chicago. Back then, hitchhiking was a common, if risky, way for kids to get around. My dad, a spirited 16-year-old, and his younger brother, Mark, who was 14, were the adventurous type. They'd spent the afternoon fishing at a local creek and found themselves miles from home. Deciding to hitch a ride, they positioned themselves in the parking lot of a roadside diner, thumbs out. Before long, a man in a sedan pulled over. He was middle-aged, unremarkable, the kind of face you'd forget in a crowd. He looked like a regular guy, maybe an office worker or a salesman. With the trusting nature of the era, my dad climbed into the passenger seat, and Mark slid into the back. The drive began normally. The man made small talk, asking about their fishing trip. But then, about 10 minutes into the drive, he did something that made the air in the car turn to ice. Without a word, he reached his right arm over the seat and placed his hand firmly on my Uncle Mark's knee. It wasn't an accidental brush. It was a deliberate, possessive gesture. My dad's internal alarm screamed. He didn't hesitate. As the car slowed for a red light at the next intersection, my dad made his move. In one fluid, desperate motion, he threw the passenger door open, reached into the back, grabbed his brother by the arm, and yelled, "We're getting out." The two boys tumbled out of the car, not looking back, and sprinted down the sidewalk as the light turned green. They didn't stop running until they were several blocks away, their hearts pounding with a fear they couldn't fully articulate. The memory of that strange, menacing man faded into a family story they'd tell as a close call. Then, in the summer of 1978, the past came roaring back. My dad, now a young man, was reading the Chicago Tribune when a photograph on the front page made his blood run cold. Staring back at him was the same unremarkable face from that sedan years before. The article detailed a horrifying investigation. The man, Robert K. Klein, had been arrested after police discovered the remains of 29 teenage boys and young men buried throughout his property. Beneath his house, in the crawl space, scattered in the yard. The report stated he would lure victims with promises of work, or simply offer them a ride, just as he had with my dad and uncle. His crimes were unspeakable, a brutal cycle of violence, torture, and murder. My dad was silent, the newspaper trembling in his hands. He and Mark had been the perfect age, the perfect targets. A single creepy gesture and his own swift instinct were all that had stood between them and a monster. The world knows the name of the real-life killer this story is based on. And every time I think about it, I am overwhelmed by a profound gratitude. I am thankful for my dad's quick thinking, and I am thankful that the only thing Robert K. Klein ever got from my family was a glimpse of two boys who got away. Scary Story 6, The Anonymous Warning. This all went down when I was 22. I was stationed in San Diego, and like a lot of single sailors, I'd created a profile on a popular dating app, hoping to meet a nice guy. Most of my conversations fizzled out quickly, or took a turn for the lewd, with matches becoming aggressive when I clarified I wasn't looking for a casual hookup. Then there was Mark. He was about 27, and he stood out because he was normal. Our conversations were easy, and he never once crossed a line. We discovered we were both in the Navy, assigned to the same base. I lived off base, but he mentioned he was a martial arts instructor who taught classes at the base gym. It seemed like a promising connection, so when he suggested meeting for coffee, I agreed. Yet, something felt off, a subtle unease I couldn't quite name. I've always been a joker, the kind of person who uses humor to break the ice. But with Mark, every joke fell flat. He wouldn't laugh or even acknowledge the attempt. He'd just steer the conversation back to its original, serious track with a kind of cold focus. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself maybe my sense of humor just didn't land with him. The night before our date, my phone rang. The screen flashed, unknown number. I usually let those go to voicemail, but on a whim, I answered. A woman's voice, tight with urgency, was on the other end. "Hello, is this Jessica?" she asked. "Who is this?" I replied, instantly on guard. "Look, I know you have a date tomorrow with Mark," she said, her words coming in a rushed whisper. "I'm telling you, do not go. He is a dangerous person." My blood ran cold. How did she know my name? How did she know about Mark? "Who are you?" I demanded, my heart starting to hammer. She pleaded with me to listen. She explained that she worked in the base's IT department, and that's how she had accessed Mark's dating profile. She had read our entire message history, found my phone number, and then used the base directory to get my full name. The fact that she had cyber-stalked me to this degree was deeply unsettling, but her reason was even more so. She claimed that a few months prior, Mark had lured her to a secluded spot after they met on the same app and had attempted to assault her. When I asked if she'd reported it, her voice broke. She said no one believed her because she was a lower rank and he was a respected instructor. My mind raced. Was this a jealous ex-girlfriend trying to sabotage his date? Or was she a genuine victim trying to protect me? I realized it didn't matter. The entire situation was a massive red flag. I wanted no part of a man with that kind of allegation hanging over him. Nor did I want to be entangled with someone who would hack and stalk to send a warning. I thanked her, my voice shaky, and ended the call. I immediately sent Mark a text, making up a flimsy excuse about a sudden family obligation and canceling our date. The next day, my phone rang. It was him. "Why did you cancel?" he asked, his tone flat. I started to recite my rehearsed excuse, but he cut me off. "Sarah called you, didn't she?" I froze. I couldn't form a single word. The silence on my end was all the confirmation he needed. "I thought so," he said, his voice cold and final. Then he hung up. I didn't wait another second. I blocked his number, my hands trembling. I never found out the absolute truth about who he was or who she was. But that anonymous call and his chillingly accurate guess told me everything I needed to know. My gut instinct had been right all along. Scary Story 7: The Whistler in the Woods. When I was 12, I was mature for my age, which meant most of my friends were 14 or 15. One crisp Friday night in late November, two of them, Chloe and Mark, invited me to a secret party at a spot we called the Railroad Trestle. The plan was for everyone to meet around midnight, to hang out and share a few drinks. I was thrilled. It felt like a rite of passage. To set the scene, the trestle was nearly 4 miles from my house. The last 2 miles involved a journey down a secluded trail that ran parallel to the train tracks. The path was about 6 feet wide, bordered by dense, shadowy woods on one side, and a steep, brush-covered embankment that led up to the tracks on the other. About 50 yards in, the trail curved away, and the thicket became so dense you could only catch fleeting glimpses of the rails. I'd been there many times during the day, but never alone, and never after dark. After waiting for my parents to fall asleep, I slipped out my bedroom window. The night was illuminated by a pale three-quarter moon, and I remember feeling a thrilling sense of freedom as I started down the familiar trail. The cold air sharp in my lungs. I was about halfway to the trestle when I first heard it. A distinct clatter, like a rock tumbling down the gravel embankment from the tracks above. I stopped, peering through the tangled brush, but saw nothing. I shook it off and kept walking. A minute later, I heard the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on the loose gravel of the train tracks, keeping pace with me. I halted again, my heart beginning to thud. Probably just a raccoon, I told myself. I took another step. Suddenly, a sharp, clear whistle cut through the silence. I spun around, straining to see the tracks, and at that exact moment, the moon slid behind a cloud, plunging the woods into deep shadow. Another whistle pierced the night, this one followed by the certain heavy sound of a person walking on the tracks. My 12-year-old mind, still hoping for a logical explanation, called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" Only silence answered. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but a cold dread was now coiling in my stomach. I started walking faster, the feeling of being watched pressing in on me. I was less than half a mile from the safety of the trestle when I heard the whistling again. This time, it was a tuneless, discordant melody that sounded twisted and wrong. "Chloe, is that you?" I yelled, my voice cracking. The whistling stopped instantly. What followed next froze me to my core. A low, guttural, deeply masculine laugh. I broke into a full panicked sprint, and the thing on the tracks began to run too. I could hear the frantic skitter of gravel and the heavy, pounding footsteps just yards away through the brush. Tears streamed down my face as I ran. Then I remembered. Just up ahead, a narrow side trail cut through the thicket, connecting my path directly to the train tracks. My breath hitched in a sob, as if it could read my mind. Deranged laugh echoed again, closer now. I saw the connecting trail up ahead and pushed my legs harder, fueled by pure terror. Just as I raced past its entrance, I heard a heavy thud as the man, or the thing, leaped down from the embankment and landed on the trail behind me. His footsteps were right on my heels. I could hear his ragged breathing. I felt a sudden, sharp tug on the back of my jacket, like a claw trying to snag me. I let out a blood-curdling scream. From in front of me, I heard a familiar voice. "Lily? Is that you, Lily?" I saw the clearing ahead, the warm glow of a small campfire, and the silhouettes of my friends. I burst into the circle of light and practically collapsed into Chloe's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. At first, she thought I'd just been spooked by the dark. When I could finally speak, I gasped out my story, hoping against hope that one of them was playing a cruel prank. But Chloe insisted, she and her boyfriend. One. We all know Jake had seen no one on the trail but me. Jake and his friend, armed with a heavy flashlight, immediately went to investigate. The rest of us huddled by the fire. The festive mood utterly shattered. They returned a few minutes later, their faces pale and serious. "Well?" Chloe asked. He opened his hand. In his palm was a filthy, three-pronged gardening claw, the kind used for tilling soil. My mind reeled, realizing with horrifying clarity that this was what had swiped at my back. Jake swallowed hard, and we could have sworn we heard someone whistling way back in the woods. I never snuck out again. To this day, sometimes I lie awake and wonder what would have happened if I had been walking on those train tracks instead of the trail below. Scary Story 8, The Unseen Visitor. This happened about 4 years ago, in the house I shared with my mother and younger brother. They still live there. We'd heard the previous owners, an elderly couple, had both passed away in the house, but we'd never given it much thought. The place had a small, finished basement that my dad and I had fixed up, making it a cozy hangout spot with a couch, a TV, and my video game consoles. It was practically my second living room. It's worth noting the basement has its own exterior door, a detail that becomes important. One evening, my best friend Leo and I were down there immersed in a movie marathon. We had the whole house to ourselves, as my mom was working a late shift and wasn't due back until around 8 p.m. We'd even texted her, jokingly begging her to bring us some snacks when she returned. It must have been 8:15, maybe 8:20, when we heard it. The distinct, heavy sound of the deadbolt on the main front door sliding open upstairs. We both paused the movie and looked at each other, our ears straining. Then came the familiar sequence of sounds. Firm footsteps crossing from the entryway into the living room. The faint creak of the floorboards near the kitchen, and the unmistakable sound of a wooden chair leg scraping against the tile as it was pulled out from the table. Leo grinned. "Dude, your mom's home. Snack time." I nodded, relaxing. About time. We waited, expecting to hear her call down to us. Instead, a minute later, my phone vibrated on the coffee table. My mom's picture flashed on the screen. "See?" I said to Leo. "She's probably calling us to come help carry the groceries." I answered, putting her on speaker. "Hey, Mom, we're in the basement." Her voice was rushed and stressed. "Liam, listen, I'm still stuck at work. There's been a security issue, and they're not letting anyone leave. I won't be home until 10 at the earliest." A cold wave of disbelief washed over me. My eyes locked with Leo's, and I saw the color drain from his face. He had heard every word. "Mom," I stammered, my mouth suddenly dry. You're not home?" "No, why? Is everything okay?" she asked, her tone shifting to concern. We heard someone come in. We heard the door, footsteps, everything." There was a tense silence on her end. "Liam, that's not possible. I have my key and you have yours. Your brother is at his friend's. There are only 2 keys. That was the terrifying truth. There were only 2 keys to the house. One was in my pocket. The other was in her purse, 30 minutes away. a primal fear took hold. With a courage I didn't know I had, I grabbed a heavy flashlight, and Leo picked up a baseball bat we kept down there. We crept up the basement stairs, our hearts hammering against our ribs. The door at the top was still locked from the inside, just as we had left it. We unlocked it and stepped into the main floor. The house was dark and silent. We flipped on every light, our weapons raised. We checked the front door. The deadbolt was securely locked. We searched the living room, the kitchen, every closet. Nothing was out of place. The kitchen chairs were tucked neatly under the table, exactly as they had been for hours. There was no sign that anyone had been there at all, but we had both heard it. The sounds were as clear and real as the fear we now felt. I had often dismissed similar noises, footsteps, muffled voices, when I was alone in the basement, chalking them up to an overactive imagination or the house settling. But now, with Leo as a witness, that comforting lie was shattered. Every unexplained sound I had ever heard in that house was suddenly, horrifyingly, validated. The thought still sends a chill down my spine to this day. Scary Story 9: The Man in the Pines. This happened over a decade ago, during a summer vacation with my dad. I must have been about 9 years old. We were staying in a rented cabin near a vast state park in upstate New York. One afternoon, my dad decided to take me on a hike through the dense pine forests that bordered our property. We had wandered deep into the woods, following a narrow deer trail. When we saw him, a man was lying face down in a bed of brown pine needles, perfectly still. My dad froze, his hand shooting out instinctively to block me from going any further. "Stay back, then," he whispered, his voice tight. His first thought, and mine, was that we had stumbled upon a dead body. The man wasn't moving a muscle, and from where we stood, we couldn't detect any sign of breathing. The silence of the forest felt heavy and oppressive. I remember my dad fumbling in his pocket, probably for his cell phone, his face pale. That's when the man moved. In a jerky, unnatural motion, he pushed himself up from the ground and turned to look directly at us. I will never forget. His face wasn't just dirty. It was contorted in a grotesque expression that was neither a smile nor a snarl, but a horrifying fusion of both. His clothes were disheveled and covered in dark, damp stains that I now, as an adult, suspect were blood. He staggered to his feet, swaying slightly, and took a stumbling step toward us. His eyes were wide and unfocused, locking onto my dad. "You know what you've got now, don't you?" he slurred, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. For the first time in my life, I saw my father utterly speechless. He was a man who always had an answer, a solution. Now he was just staring, paralyzed. The man then threw his head back and screamed, the sound tearing through the quiet woods. "You've got a dead man on your hands!" With that, he spun around and sprinted erratically into the thicket, crashing through the undergrowth until the sound of his flight faded into nothing. I remember feeling more confused than anything, a dull, childlike fear gnawing at me. But my dad, he later told me that in that moment, he felt a terror so pure and cold he could barely move. He wasn't sure if the man was referring to himself, to someone else in the woods, or to some unimaginable future event. We didn't wait to find out. We turned and practically ran back to the cabin. My dad immediately called the police, who conducted a search of the area. They found nothing. No man. No evidence of a struggle. No explanation. To this day, we have no idea who that man was, what he meant, or what the dark stains on his clothes were. I've been back to that area since, but I've never set foot in those woods again. Some mysteries are better left unexplored. Scary story 10. The Grin in the Moonlight. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when my phone buzzed. It was my coworker, Marcus, a fitness enthusiast and an Army reservist. He was looking for a partner for a night run. Due to my bad knees, I countered with an offer for a night hike instead. He agreed, and we decided to meet at a remote camping spot in Redwood Canyon, planning to follow the main fire road a couple of miles up into the hills. We both pulled into the deserted campsite around 11:30 p.m., armed with nothing but flashlights and water bottles. The night was clear, and a bright 3/4 moon bathed the landscape in an eerie silver light. So we decided to walk by moonlight to preserve our night vision. About 20 minutes into our hike, we first heard it, a persistent rustling in the dense manzanita bushes lining the road. We dismissed it as a raccoon or a coyote, even joking about who was secretly more scared. The bravado was a thin shield, but it held. The spell was briefly broken when a pickup truck roared past, its high beams flooding the road and blinding us momentarily. After it passed, the darkness fell deeper. Marcus announced he had to answer the call of nature and ducked into the next campsite clearing, which sloped down toward the sound of a shallow stream. I waited on the road, listening to the crickets. Then I heard it, a sharp rustle from where he had gone, followed by a heavy splash in the water, and then more frantic rustling. A second later, Marcus came crashing back up the slope, his face as white as bone in the moonlight. "Dude, we have to bug out. Now!" he gasped, his voice tight with a fear I'd never heard from him. If a guy like Marcus was this spooked, it was serious. We turned and started running back the way we came. My knee, however, quickly protested, sending a sharp, debilitating pain up my leg. As I stumbled, I heard a chillingly distinct sound from the darkness behind us, the metallic shk shk of a handgun slide being racked, loading around into the chamber. Marcus leaned in close, his whisper a harsh gust in my ear. "Just in case." He then threw my arm over his shoulder, half carrying me as we hurried down the road. Fumbling with my free hand, I clicked on my high-powered flashlight and swung the beam toward the stream. There, squatting naked in the shallow, icy water, was a massive man. His muscles were taut, and his body was slick with water and mud. But it was his face that froze the blood in my veins. He was staring directly at us, with the widest, most unnerving grin I have ever seen, a rictus of pure malice, a low, guttural growl, like that of a feral dog, rumbled from his chest. And he spoke a single word in a deep, gravelly tone that felt like a physical blow. Run. We didn't need to be told twice. We dropped our backpacks, sacrificing everything for speed. Marcus all but carried me as we fled, our hearts hammering a frantic rhythm against our ribs. The moment the red glow of my truck's taillights came into view, I mashed the unlock button on my key fob. We scrambled inside, locked the doors, and I peeled out of that gravel lot, spraying rocks behind us. The second our phones regained a signal, we called 911. We met two sheriff's deputies at a well-lit grocery store parking lot, and with trepidation, agreed to lead them back to the scene. As we pulled into the campsite, our headlights swept across my coworker's car, and there he was, sitting cross-legged and naked on the hood of Marcus's sedan, as if waiting for our return. He fixed that same horrifying grin on us as the deputies emerged from their cruiser. He growled at them as they approached, a primal, defiant sound. It took both officers to tackle him and wrestle him into handcuffs. As they put him in the back of the patrol car, one of the deputies turned on the interior light. The man's face pressed against the glass, his unwavering, manic smile directed straight at Marcus and me. As the car pulled away, he yelled out of the cracked window, his voice echoing in the silent night. "Not fast enough!" Neither of us has ventured out alone after dark since. We never did find out who that man was, what was wrong with him, or what he intended to do that night. Some questions are better left unanswered. Scary Story 11. The Mist Children of Willow Creek. It was a bright Saturday afternoon in the summer of 2015. We were living in a suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina, in a house that backed up to a small, murky pond. Beyond the pond was a dense, undeveloped tract of land everyone called the Willow Creek Preserve. My son, Leo, was 6 years old at the time. I was getting ready to sunbathe and told Leo he could play in the backyard while I changed into my swimsuit. I couldn't have been inside for more than 5 minutes. When I came out, he was already running back toward the house, his face flushed and his eyes wide with a strange mixture of exhilaration and fear. He told me a story that has stayed with me ever since. He said that as soon as he reached the pond, the world went completely silent. The chirping birds, the distant traffic, the rustling leaves, everything stopped. Then he heard music. It wasn't coming from a radio. It was faint, melodic, and seemed to emanate from behind the pond, deep within the preserve. Compelled by curiosity, he followed the sound. There at the tree line, he saw them. He called them the Mist Kids. They weren't solid shadows, he explained, but figures made of a swirling, transparent gray smoke, like living fog. They didn't speak, but they communicated, inviting him to play. First, they played tag. Then, they worked together to build little towers out of smooth, creak-worn stones. The games escalated to hide and seek. Leo was it. He spotted one of the misty forms flitting between the cypress trees and gave chase. In his excitement, he tripped over a root and fell hard onto the soft, damp earth. The moment he fell, the playfulness vanished. All the small mist children emerged from their hiding places and surrounded him. Then, two enormous figures rose from the deeper shadows of the woods. Leo described them as being as tall as our house. They were composed of the same smoky substance, but their presence was immense and heavy. He felt a wave of menacing anger wash over him, a silent scolding that felt like it was entirely his fault for tripping, for disrupting their game. Terrified, he scrambled to his feet and ran back to the house without looking back. The entire ordeal, with its multiple games and detailed interactions, sounded like it should have taken over an hour. Yet, my watch confirmed he had only been outside for a handful of minutes. When he came in, he was inexplicably exhausted and fell into a deep, immediate nap. I never discredited his story. Leo has always had a vivid imagination, but he is not a liar. He's always been a brave, truthful kid, and the genuine fear in his eyes was undeniable. It deeply unsettled me, but I didn't press him, only asking later if he had ever seen them again. He said he hadn't, but he wistfully added that he missed them because they were so much fun to play with. A few years later, when he was 10, I brought it up again. "Leo, do you remember the mist children by the pond?" He nodded, his demeanor more serious now. "Yes, all of it was real, Mom. I remember playing with them for hours, and I thought I was going to be in huge trouble for being gone so long. But you weren't even worried. We talked about what they looked like, and his description had matured. They were like shadows, but also like smoke," he said. "They weren't just black. They were see-through, but you could still see them. The closest thing is like a thick mist. But it was them, you know? It's hard to describe." Recently, I stumbled upon forums discussing similar paranormal encounters. I was hooked, recognizing the chilling similarities, the preternatural silence, the enchanting music, the transparent figures, and the profound time loss. Yesterday, I asked a now 14-year-old Leo about it once more. Initially embarrassed, he tried to dismiss it. "Mom, it was probably just temporary schizophrenia or something." But when I told him that many other people record identical experiences, he relaxed and opened up. He confirmed the music was beautiful, not scary. He again described the misty, smoky children and the towering, angry figures that frightened him so deeply. This time, he added a new detail. "It was dark when I ran home, and I went straight to bed." This confused me. I distinctly remember it being a sunny summer afternoon. He did go straight to sleep, but the sudden onset of darkness must be how his frightened 6-year-old mind encoded the memory. We moved to a new home just a few weeks after this experience, and it never happened again. I am grateful for that. For while the Miss Children began their game with an invitation to play, it ended with a warning from giants made of smoke. A warning I fear we may not have understood. Scary Story 12. The Uninvited in the Garage. It was a standard Friday night, last fall. My best friend Chris and I were at my place in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. Our ritual was simple: pepperoni pizza, a long session of Grand Theft Auto, and general relaxation. Around midnight, Chris decided to head home. Since he lived just across the street, there was no rush, and I walked him out through the kitchen door into my backyard. That's when I saw it. The side door to my detached two-car garage was standing ajar. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I am meticulous about locking that door. Always. "Hey, did you go into the garage for something?" I asked Chris, trying to keep my voice casual. He shook his head. "No, man. Haven't been out here all night." I was home alone that evening, and Chris was the only other person on the property. The last time I'd been in the garage was earlier that afternoon, and I distinctly remembered turning the key in the deadbolt. A wave of unease washed over me. We approached the door slowly. The weak glow from the backyard motion sensor light confirmed our worst fear. The wooden frame around the deadbolt was splintered, the metal lock itself bent and useless. Red flag. Call the cops. Now. I whispered to Chris, my voice tight. As he dialed 911, I sprinted back into the house. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I went to my bedroom safe. Inside was my most prized possession, the Colt Python 357 Magnum my father had given me. I loaded it with trembling hands, the weight of the steel both terrifying and reassuring. I returned to the backyard and gave Chris a grim nod. With the gun held in a two-handed grip, I slowly pushed the damaged door open. The lower level of the garage was pitch black and smelled of oil and damp concrete. I flipped the light switch, and the fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, illuminating my car and workbenches. Nothing seemed out of place. Now for the hard part. The upstairs loft. It was used mostly for storage, a labyrinth of old furniture and boxes. The wooden stairs were old and creaky. I took them one painstaking step at a time, my senses on high alert, the Colt leading the way. At the top, I reached for the pull cord for the overhead light. The single bulb cast long, dancing shadows. Everything looked normal, just a cluttered storage space. I was about to call down to Chris that it was clear when a flicker of movement caught my eye. In the farthest storage cubby, a recessed space between two bookshelves, a man was crouched with his back to me. He was trying to make himself small, to blend into the darkness. My blood ran cold. Tucked into the back waistband of his jeans was the unmistakable black handle of a semi-automatic pistol. I froze, my finger resting on the trigger guard. I was shaking so badly, I was afraid I'd drop the gun. I took a shallow breath, raised the Colt, and opened my mouth to shout a command. That's when I heard it. The beautiful, welcome sound of distant sirens growing rapidly closer. I immediately lowered my weapon, walked to the top of the stairs, and got down on my knees with my hands clearly visible. A few moments later, 2 police officers, their own guns drawn, charged up the stairs. One helped me to my feet, while the other advanced into the loft. "So, get the hell out of there, now!" the officer barked. To my utter shock, I saw the cops lead not 1, but 2 men out from the loft. The second had been hiding behind a large stack of boxes, just feet from where I'd been standing. They were handcuffed and led away to a waiting squad car. After the scene was secured, one of the officers approached me. "You okay, son?" he asked. I was still trembling. He looked me in the eye and said, "You were pretty lucky tonight. By the looks of it, they were waiting to break into your house." God only knows what they had planned. They took my statement and left. I never found out who the men were or what they wanted, and I don't care to. I still have the Colt Python, but I can't bring myself to go into that garage alone anymore, especially after dark. Time has passed, but the memory of that man's back and the gun tucked into his waistband is a feeling I will never, ever forget. Scary Story 13. The Night I Grew a Conscience. My friend Chloe had a stalker. For weeks, a man had been following her around the city, leaving disturbing notes on her car and relentlessly trying to force her to go out with him. When her roommate left town for a week, her fear became paralyzing. She asked me to stay with her. Most people would have expected her to call one of her male friends for protection. I'm a woman, and at first glance, I'm not an intimidating presence. But Chloe knew what others didn't. I was a 26-year-old amateur mixed martial arts contender with a 12-3 record. Beyond that, several therapists I'd seen had noted what they cautiously called psychopathic tendencies, a clinical lack of empathy and a complete absence of the normal aversion to violence. It's what made me a ruthlessly effective fighter. I assured her, "Nothing will happen to you tonight. I'll be right here in the living room. I won't sleep." The hours ticked by in the silent, sparsely furnished apartment. They had just moved in, so the living room contained only a second-hand couch, a television, and a single bookshelf. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the silence was broken by a series of faint, metallic, scraping sounds outside. My gut tightened. I knew it was him. My mind, cold and analytical, ran through the psychological profile of a fixated stalker. They don't give up. If he crossed the threshold, I decided, then and there, that I would give him a reason to never come back. I would hurt him so badly, he'd be permanently reminded of his mistake. I felt no moral hesitation, only a calm, predatory focus. I slipped into a dark corner of the living room, melting into the shadows and becoming perfectly still. The front doorknob jiggled. Then came the distinct, deliberate sound of the lock being picked. The door swung open slowly, and a figure slipped inside. My heart, usually steady before a fight, plummeted into my stomach. Not only did the intruder have a gun held low at his side, but I recognized him instantly. It was Marcus the Mauler Vance, a heavyweight contender from the circuit. I'd faced him once before. In a brutal match, I only won by a controversial split decision. It was a fight I had no desire to ever repeat, especially not when he was armed. The pieces clicked together. Chloe had come to a few of my fights. That's where he must have first seen her. I watched, my breathing silenced, as he moved with unsettling quietness across the room, directly toward Chloe's bedroom door. For the first time in my life, I felt a cold spike of dread. The calculus had changed. This wasn't a cage. It was a home invasion, and my opponent had a lethal advantage. As his hand reached for her doorknob, I moved. I was a phantom from the shadows. In one fluid motion, I seized the gun from his grip, twisted away. And before he could even register my presence, I emptied the entire magazine into his center mass. The roar of the gunshots was deafening in the small apartment. Chloe's scream from behind the door was pure terror. I spent the next minute speaking to her through the door, my voice unnervingly calm, telling her it was me, that she was safe. Then came a frantic knock at the front door. I snatched the empty gun, thinking it could be an accomplice. But Chloe, recognizing the voice, cried out that it was her neighbor. We let him in, his face ashen. He had already called the police. The cops arrived minutes later. I went to the station, answered their questions truthfully, and was released. The shooting ruled a clear case of self-defense. The ordeal wasn't over. A few weeks later, Marcus's sister brought a wrongful death lawsuit against me. In the preliminary hearing, the judge reviewed the facts: the broken lock, the gun in his hand, his violent history and stalking charges, then dismissed the case outright. But something in me had shattered. The cold, clinical efficiency I had always possessed was gone, replaced by a visceral sickness. I had killed a man with a gun, a detached and clinical act, and it had affected me more than any bloody, bare-knuckled brawl ever had. I dropped out of fighting immediately. I started rooming with Chloe permanently, partly to guard against any further trouble, but mostly to surround myself with her gentle nature. In the end, I was more than willing to trade my constitution for her life. It was a hell of a way to grow a conscience. I've seen his sister a few times since, in a coffee shop or at the grocery store. She always keeps her distance. I tell myself it's a coincidence, but a quiet thought always echoes in the back of my mind. I really hope psychopathy doesn't run in the family. Scary Story 14. The night we met the Banshee. It was a crisp Tuesday night, just after 10 p.m. My best friend Leo and I were on the final leg of our 6-mile round-trip walk to a bubble tea shop. We were on a long, straight stretch of sidewalk alongside Roosevelt Boulevard, a 4-lane road that was a hectic thoroughfare by day, but a near-deserted expanse of asphalt by night. A little background. Leo and I are avid hikers. When our day jobs prevent us from hitting the trails, we take long, nocturnal walks through the city's safer neighborhoods, a blend of quiet suburbs and closed shopping plazas. We're cautious, always wearing battery-powered, neon green vests and reflective armbands. After a few too many close calls with inattentive drivers, we'd encountered our share of odd characters before, but nothing could have prepared us for the woman we came to call the Banshee. We saw her from a great distance under the alternating pools of orange streetlight and deep shadow cast by sprawling oak trees. She was a solitary figure, appearing and disappearing rhythmically as she moved under each light. We, glowing brightly in our vests, were impossible to miss. I assumed she was an employee from one of the nearby strip malls, finally heading home after a late closing shift. She seemed ordinary, even quaintly dressed, and was walking with a steady, purposeful gait. That illusion shattered when the noises began. It started with a harsh, guttural hacking, as if she were trying to dislodge something from her throat with maximum volume. This morphed into a bizarre, strangled sound, a cross between a rooster's crow and the yap of a small, angry dog. We kept walking, our pace slowing, exchanging nervous glances. Maybe a disability, Leo whispered, trying to rationalize it. She looked completely normal, a sweet-looking elderly woman in a long, heavy skirt, a button-up cardigan, and clunky orthopedic shoes. She carried a simple cloth tote bag. Her hair was a cloud of soft white curls. She looked like someone's beloved grandmother. But the sounds coming from her were anything but grandmotherly. As the distance closed to less than 2 blocks, the symphony of strangeness intensified. Low, moaning groans made us joke weakly about a zombie apocalypse. Then, she added piercing, screechy notes that reminded me of an enraged cockatoo. She cycled through these sounds with brief, unnerving silences in between. My eyes were drawn to her hand, the one not holding the tote bag. It was clenched, and I couldn't see what, if anything, she was holding. She looked harmless, but every instinct screamed that she was not. "Time to cross?" Leo asked, his voice tight. I nodded in immediate agreement. Just as we stepped toward the curb, she did the same. She veered off the sidewalk and began a deliberate diagonal path across the empty road, as if to avoid us. I felt a wave of relief. She was just as wary of us as we were of her. We relaxed and continued on our path. But just as we were about to pass parallel to her in the middle of the street, she stopped. She turned her head, locked eyes with us, and then let out a blood-curdling shriek. Her mouth stretched into a cavernous black O, and she charged. She rushed directly at us, a shrieking, wailing tempest in a cardigan. Leo and I leaped apart, and her momentum carried her straight through the space between us. The sound she made was agonizing, a high-pitched, metallic wail that seemed like it should have torn her vocal cords. It was a truly banshee-like screech, We braced for her to turn and attack again, but she didn't. She simply veered back onto the sidewalk on our original side and continued her journey without breaking stride. As she walked away, she kept looking back over her shoulder, delivering short, sharp bursts of her horrific shrieking between gasps for air. When she was a full block away, the screeching devolved back into the strange, crowing barks. We stood frozen in the middle of the sidewalk, watching until she was just a distant, disappearing dot, her unearthly noises fading into the hum of the city. To this day, I have no explanation. Did our glowing vests trigger a neurological episode? Was it a severe psychiatric condition? She seemed to know where she was going, so we didn't intervene. We just stood there, two seasoned night walkers, utterly shaken by a cute little old lady who sounded like a harbinger of death. It was, without a doubt, the freakiest night of our lives. Scary Story 15. The Girl in the Devil's Closet. 5 years ago, when I was 12, my family lived in a 2-story colonial house in a quiet suburb of Richmond, Virginia. The basement was partially finished, and it was our primary play area. My older sister, Chloe, was 14, and our younger cousin, Lily, was just 3 years old. One evening, the three of us were downstairs playing a lively game of hide and seek. After a few rounds, it was little Lily's turn to be it. Like most toddlers, she hated being the seeker, but with some coaxing, we convinced her to play along. The basement layout was simple, but had one unsettling feature. At the bottom of the stairs, you were directly facing Chloe's bedroom door. To the immediate left was a deep, windowless storage closet my father jokingly called the Devil's Closet. We always started the counting in Chloe's room. Lily began her slow, deliberate count to 20 as Chloe and I scrambled to hide. I, deciding on the farthest point, sprinted down the hall and tucked myself behind the washing machine in the laundry room. Chloe, thinking she was clever, simply slid under her own bed. We heard Lily finish counting and begin her search. The pitter-patter of her small feet echoed in the basement. After about 30 seconds, we heard the distinct creak of the heavy door to the Devil's Closet opening. Then, we heard her speak in her tiny, cheerful voice. "Hi, Angel. What are you doing? I'm a girl. I found you." A chill, cold and immediate, settled over me. I held my breath, listening. Lily's cheerful giggle was suddenly cut short, replaced by a piercing, terrified scream that tore through the silence. I erupted from my hiding spot and sprinted down the hallway. I found Lily standing frozen in front of the open closet, her small body trembling. I scooped her up and carried her into Chloe's room, where my sister had just emerged from under her bed, her face pale with alarm. We tried to soothe Lily, who was crying hysterically, her little face contorted with fear and confusion. Between sobs, she managed to choke out her story. "Angel wouldn't talk to me," she whimpered. "She just looked at me and made an ugly face. When we explained that neither of us had been in the closet, her confusion turned to pure dread. "Then who was that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. We had no answer for her. In the years since that night, a chilling pattern has emerged. Other family members have occasionally mentioned seeing a young girl with pale skin and long, dark hair in the periphery of their vision, often mistaking her for me until she vanishes into thin air. We never again called that space by its ominous nickname, but the memory of the silent, grimacing girl Lily called Angel remains, a permanent ghost in our family's history. Scary story 16. 2 nights in a Jeep I'll never forget. Let me be clear. Sleeping in your car is a gamble, and I lost twice. I have 2 distinct memories of nights where I was certain my life was about to become a headline. The first night, the mariachi screams. A few years back, I was on a cross-country road trip. I was in my early 20s and on a tight budget. One Wednesday night in late October, I was camping in a remote, designated spot in the Carson National Forest, about an hour northwest of Santa Fe. The air had a bitter bite, and the forecast threatened snow for the early morning, right when I planned to drive into Texas. In what I thought was a stroke of genius, I decided to skip the tent and sleep in the back of my Jeep Wrangler to stay warm and get a faster start. I was deep asleep when the sound of spinning tires on gravel jolted me awake. An old, beat-up Ford Explorer skidded to a halt, its headlights sweeping wildly before it stopped sideways, blocking the entrance to my campsite. The vehicle was blaring mariachi music at an ear-splitting volume. My heart hammered against my ribs. Just some drunk partiers, I tried to tell myself, hoping they'd move on. Then the doors flew open. 4 or 5 figures spilled out and immediately started sprinting into the pitch-black woods. But they weren't laughing or shouting. They were screaming. These were raw, blood-curdling shrieks of pure terror, the kind you hear in horror movies. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, utterly bewildered, and now deeply afraid. After a minute, the screams cut off abruptly, and an unnerving silence fell, broken only by the distant mariachi music still pumping from the idling SUV. I stayed curled in a ball, too scared to even look at my phone. Time stretched into an eternity. Then I heard them, quiet, murmuring voices right outside my Jeep. They were circling the vehicle. I held my breath, and one voice, chillingly close, whispered, "Do you think somebody's in there?" That was it. I lost all composure. I let out a primal scream and scrambled over the center console, frantically clawing my way into the driver's seat. I turned on the headlights and jammed the key into the ignition. The high beams illuminated the scene perfectly. Several figures, their features obscured by shadows, were caught like deer in the headlights. They scattered instantly, fleeing in every direction, vanishing into the tree line and down the mountainside like ghosts. I didn't wait to see if they'd return. I threw the Jeep into drive and got out of there. Since that night, I never travel without my S&W J-frame revolver tucked securely in my center console. The second night, the hand in the dark. The second incident happened the following December in Little Rock, Arkansas. I was driving from North Carolina to Oklahoma to spend Christmas with my family. Too cheap for a hotel, I found a seemingly safe spot, the back corner of a well-lit hotel parking lot just off I-40. I parked, reclined the seat, and fell asleep. I was awakened by a soft, persistent scritch sound. Bleary-eyed, I turned my head, and my blood ran cold. A dark figure was crouched beside my Jeep, working a knife or a screwdriver into the seam of my soft top, trying to pry the zipper open. I was paralyzed with fear. It wasn't until they successfully created a small tear and a gloved hand began to worm its way inside that my survival instinct kicked in. My hand closed around the heaviest object within reach, my metal Coleman lantern. With all my strength, I swung it down onto the intruding hand. I heard a muffled cry of pain from outside. I didn't wait to assess the damage. In one fluid, panicked motion, I launched myself into the driver's seat, started the engine, and slammed my foot on the accelerator. I peeled out of that parking lot so fast, the tires screeched. I didn't stop for gas, for a red light, or for coffee. I merged onto I-40 and drove west for nearly 30 miles before my hands stopped shaking. Needless to say, that was the absolute last time I ever attempted to sleep in my Jeep. Some lessons you only need to learn once. Scary Story 17. The Silence and the Stare. My first job at 18 was as a dietary aide in the cafeteria of a regional psychiatric hospital. It was a role that, despite its simplicity, brought me a profound sense of purpose. My task was to hand out meal trays, but the real reward was the gratitude in the patient's eyes. I cared for them deeply, and they, in turn, seemed to appreciate my presence. One day, a new patient was admitted. His name was Leo, and he was a young man around my own age. He was of Japanese descent and possessed a silence so profound it was unnerving. He never spoke a word, not even to acknowledge his meal. While other patients socialized in the cafeteria, Leo always sat alone at the same corner table, often remaining there long after the others had left. One evening, we were hosting a movie night in the common room. The cafeteria was my last stop before clocking out. The overhead lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the empty tables, and the usual nighttime creaks and echoes of the hospital felt especially pronounced. As I finished wiping down the counters, I realized Leo was still there, sitting motionless in the gloom. Gathering my courage, I approached him. I kept my voice soft and gentle, the tone we were trained to use. "Leo," I said, "the movie is starting. Wouldn't you like to join the others?" For a long moment, there was no reaction. Then, slowly, he turned his head and fixed his eyes on me. We stood frozen in that dim light for what felt like an eternity. He was completely silent and still, but his eyes were the most unsettling part. They weren't just blank. They were hollow, as if he were looking right through me. His gaze turned inward. A cold sense of dread began to crawl up my spine. Here I was, utterly alone, with a patient whose diagnosis was a mystery to me, and every instinct was screaming that I was in danger. Just as my nervous sweat was beginning to feel cold on my skin, he stood up. He muttered a single, barely audible word, "Okay," and then walked out of the cafeteria without another glance in my direction. The relief that washed over me was so intense, I felt lightheaded. I hadn't even realized I'd been holding my breath. I finished closing up and left as quickly as I could. The true chill didn't set in until a few days later, when one of the senior nurses noticed I was still a bit shaken. She pulled me aside and explained Leo's situation. He suffered from a severe, treatment-resistant form of schizophrenia, compounded by profound depression. His brilliant future had been shattered by his illness, leading to his family essentially abandoning him. The nurse explained that his silence wasn't just withdrawal. He was actively experiencing auditory hallucinations. The voices in his head were constant, violent, and graphic, detailing how to kill people and what to do with the remains. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. That long, silent stare in the dim cafeteria wasn't just emptiness. He had been listening, but not to me. He had been listening to a chorus of voices that were most likely instructing him on how to end my life. I had been alone, vulnerable, and completely unaware of the internal battle raging just feet away from me. Leo was discharged 2 days after our encounter and never returned to our facility. I often think of him, despite the fear I felt that night. My predominant emotion is a deep, aching hope. I hope wherever he is, that he finally found the peace and help that he so desperately needed. Scary Story 18. The Fingers in the Crawl Space. About a decade ago, I was 17 and living with my parents and older sister, Chloe, in a centuries-old cottage in a remote English village. The village wasn't just quiet, it was practically dormant, consisting of a handful of houses, a small stone church, and residents who had been old for as long as I could remember. It was summer, and with my family tethered to their jobs in the nearby town, I was left to my own devices. My days followed a predictable rhythm. Wake up around 11, after everyone had left, venture downstairs for toast, watch television, and then retreat to my upstairs bedroom to lose myself in video games. The solitude was my normal. Our house was a quaint, 2-bedroom cottage with a peculiar layout. Upstairs was essentially a converted attic, consisting only of my room and Chloe's, situated directly opposite each other on a small landing. Both rooms had sharply slanted ceilings, and where the roof met the walls, a long, low crawl space ran the length of the house on both sides. These spaces were accessible through miniature doors about 4 feet tall, with simple latches on the outside. A crucial detail I'd learned the hard way. Once inside, you couldn't open the door from the interior. You were trapped. One morning, I was woken by a familiar sound, the faint rustling of a small creature in the crawl space that ran along my sister's side of the wall. It was a common noise. Field mice were our constant, unwelcome tenants. I thought little of it and began my daily ritual. The first oddity came while I was watching TV downstairs. I heard distinct, heavy footsteps moving around in Chloe's room directly above me. I assumed she'd taken the day off, but a couple of hours later, as I booted up my computer in my room, I faced her closed door and realized how late it was. Chloe never stayed in her room on her days off. She claimed the living room sofa as her throne. Puzzled, I was about to dismiss it when I saw it, a shadow moving across the sliver of light under her door. Someone was definitely in there. Curiosity finally overruled my teenage inertia. I knocked. "Chloe?" No answer. I knocked harder, calling her name louder. Still, only silence. A prickle of unease danced on my neck. "All right, screw this," I muttered, and pushed the door open. The room was empty, confused. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning for any clue. And that's when I saw it, and my blood ran cold. At the bottom of the small crawlspace door was a hole, chewed by mice, just large enough to fit a hand through. And protruding from that hole, from the inside, were 4 human fingers, gripping the doorframe. My mind recoiled. I watched, frozen, as the fingers slowly curled back and disappeared into the darkness of the crawlspace. I backed out of the room, shut the door silently, and retreated to my own bedroom, my heart hammering. In a panic, I grabbed the most intimidating object I owned. A realistic-looking, but completely fake, cap-gun rifle from a theme park. Realizing its inadequacy, I soon traded it for one of my dad's heavy steel golf clubs from downstairs. I then corralled our 2 dogs and called my mom at work, my voice trembling. She and her manager, David, arrived within minutes. I recounted the story, the shadow, the fingers. My mom, a woman of formidable practicality, led the charge upstairs. While David and I hovered nervously in the hallway, golf club raised, she marched to the crawlspace door, yanked it open, and stuck her head into the darkness. A moment of tense silence was broken by her sharp, angry voice. "Jake, what in God's name are you doing in there? Get out now!" Jake was Chloe's boyfriend. As the story unraveled, we learned that my dad had told him the night before that his 5-day stay was over. He was supposed to have left. Instead, he and Chloe had hatched a plan for him to secretly stay another night. He was to hide in the crawlspace in the morning until everyone left for work. The one flaw in their brilliant plan: they had completely forgotten about me. When I had knocked, Jake had hidden behind the door. When I entered, he had scrambled into the crawlspace and, hearing me approach the small door, had used his fingers to hold it shut from the inside, terrified of being locked in. My mom ordered him out of the house immediately. But this was not the last we heard of Jake. We later discovered he had stolen money from Chloe's room during his stay. Their terrible relationship continued. He got her pregnant, and a year later, he was arrested for smashing our windows in a fit of rage. Later, while I was at university in the same city, I learned he was serving time in the local prison for stabbing someone in an unrelated incident. He was, by all accounts, a genuinely bad individual. There were two disgusting postscripts to the story. First, having been trapped for nearly 14 hours with no bathroom, Jake had left a collection of empty bottles in the crawl space. Second, a year later, while retrieving Christmas decorations from the deep recess of the storage space, my mother found a small bag filled with his feces, hidden right next to where my bed stood on the other side of the wall. The rustling that had woken me that first morning was likely him stashing his waste among our tinsel and ornaments. I'm just grateful no one was hurt that day. I often wonder what might have happened if I, a scrawny teenager, had discovered him alone in that house, cornered in the dark, with his violent history. It was a chilling lesson in the dangers that can hide in the most familiar of places. Scary Story 19. Norma's Message. I began working as a nursing assistant at Willow Creek Manor in my hometown shortly after I turned 18. Being one of the youngest on the evening shift, I was the usual target for pranks and ghost stories, often leaving my shifts thoroughly spooked. I worked the 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift, frequently picking up extra hours until 2 a.m. I didn't mind. The pay was good, and I genuinely loved the residents. One of my favorite residents was a woman named Eleanor. She was spirited and often confused, but we shared a special bond. I was the one she always asked for, whether she needed help with a bath or just wanted a quiet conversation. There were difficult nights, of course, when her dementia would take hold. She would pace the hallways, clutching her well-worn Bible, desperate to get out, sometimes becoming so agitated she would bite my coworkers. Yet, I was always the one who could gently coax her back to her room and soothe her back to sleep. One afternoon, I arrived for my shift, and my supervisor pulled me aside. She told me Eleanor's condition had deteriorated, and she needed to be transferred to a specialized facility. The transport team had been unable to get her into the van, and since I was the go-to person for convincing reluctant residents, perhaps because I was young and they saw a familiar kindness in me, they asked me to help. I went to Eleanor's room. I held her hand and spoke softly, telling her she needed to go, that everything would be okay, and that I would see her again soon. She trusted me, and she went peacefully. Weeks passed. Then, one day, my supervisor called me into her office and delivered the sad news. Eleanor had passed away from kidney failure. I was heartbroken, but I tucked the grief away and focused on my work. About 4 months later, a strange series of events began. A new resident, a woman named Mrs. Gable, had moved into Eleanor's old room. I had been off for a week dealing with personal matters, so I had never met or even seen this woman before. I was back on duty, passing out the evening ice water, when one of my coworkers, Sarah, came around the corner. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with shock. "What's wrong with you?" I asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I think I did," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Very funny," I said, rolling my eyes. "You're not going to get me today." "No, I'm serious," she insisted, grabbing my arm. "The new lady in Eleanor's old room? She just asked for you by name. She says she needs to tell you something." I laughed it off, convinced it was an elaborate setup. "You're not funny, Sarah. I swear I had nothing to do with this. I'll go with you, but you have to go see her." Reluctantly, I agreed. I walked into the room, expecting a joke. "Yes, Mrs. Gable? What can I help you with?" The elderly woman looked up at me, her eyes clear and earnest. "I was just talking to a lovely lady named Eleanor," she said calmly. "She wanted me to tell you something." I glanced at Sarah, who was standing in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, her face a mask of horror. "This was no prank," Mrs. Gable continued. "Eleanor wanted me to tell you that she is back, and she misses you. She said she used to live in this room, and that was her chair." She pointed to the worn armchair in the corner. "She just wanted to come see you, but when I got back from the restroom, she was gone." A cold dread washed over me. I stared at Mrs. Gable, my mind reeling. I'll be right back," I stammered. I closed the door behind me and turned to Sarah. "You're not funny," I hissed. "Honey, I didn't do this," she said, her voice low and sincere. I couldn't bring myself to go back and tell Mrs. Gable that the woman she'd been conversing with had died months ago. Later, I discovered from the day shift nurses that Mrs. Gable had started asking for me by name just 2 days after she arrived. Days when I was still off work and she had no possible way of knowing who I was. After that, I avoided that room as much as I could. I even had Mrs. Gable's shower schedule permanently moved to the morning shift. Some messages from beyond are better left unanswered, and some rooms hold on to their occupants long after they're gone. Story 20. The gloved figure in the old house. Throughout my childhood, I lived in a historic home on the outskirts of Toronto, Canada. The house was originally built in the late 1940s, a sturdy but simple post-war structure that my parents purchased in 2001. The layout was unusual, divided into 2 distinct sections. The original part of the house, at the front, was the oldest. It had creaky, original hardwood floors, high ceilings, and contained just 3 rooms. My bedroom, my older sister Maya's room, and a large playroom. This entire wing was where most of the strange activity was centered. A narrow hallway connected this old section to a modern, spacious addition that had been built in the backyard, which housed my parents' master suite. From the age of about 5 or 6, I developed a deep, inexplicable dread of the old part of the house. Even in the bright light of afternoon, crossing the threshold into that wing alone would send a wave of panic through me. I couldn't explain it. I just felt an overwhelming sense of unease. The epicenter of this activity was always the playroom, the largest room in the old wing. It was where small, unsettling things would happen. Toys would move or go missing, and battery-operated devices would switch on in the middle of the night, long after they had been turned off. My first memorable experience happened when I was 5. I suffered a vivid night terror of a black, dirt-caked glove reaching out from under my pillow, its fingers straining to grab me. When I told my parents, they seemed dismissive, though I would later learn this was far from the truth. When I was 7, a bizarre incident woke both me and my sister. Her Barbie keyboard, which had been silent for hours, suddenly began playing a distorted, tinny tune deep in the night. We ran to our parents, and I saw their faces grow pale and tense. This was not an isolated event for them. My dad went into the playroom with clear apprehension to turn it off, and he discovered the ceiling light wouldn't work. Even though it functioned perfectly, the next morning, another chilling event occurred in my own bedroom when I was 8. I had a popular, battery-powered Tomb Treasures playset. Its main feature was that when a toy car rolled over a trigger, a mummy's eyes would glow, and a scratchy, pre-recorded voice would declare, "I've got you now." One night, I was lying wide awake, unable to sleep, when the silence was shattered by that very phrase, "I've got you now." I jolted upright to see the mummy's arms flailing up and down repeatedly, a function the toy was not designed to perform. They were only supposed to move once. After a few seconds, it simply stopped. I was certain I had switched it off hours earlier. That was the night I started begging to sleep on the living room couch. Other phenomena were persistent, but less dramatic. A clock that refused to stay on the wall, no matter how we secured it. Unexplained bangs and scratches. Cold drafts with no open windows. And our family dog barking fiercely at empty corners and doorways. We moved out in 2012, and it was only years later, after my parents had divorced, that they shared their own experiences. It's one of the few things they still agree on. They recounted stories from when the playroom was Maya's nursery. Baby monitors, picking up the sound of lullabies playing from a device with no batteries. And that same device being found mysteriously reattached to the crib or thrown across the room. But the most disturbing account, one that sent a chill down my spine, was their separate descriptions of a dark figure. Both of my parents, on different occasions, years apart, woke in the dead of night to see a tall figure, over 6 feet tall, wearing a long trench coat, standing over the other as they slept. The figure would vanish the instant they blinked. What terrifies me to this day is the specific detail they both recalled independently. The figure was wearing black, soiled gloves, just like the one from my childhood nightmare. Scary Story 21. The Grin in the Dark. It was a quiet Sunday night. I had just dropped my girlfriend, Chloe, off at her grandmother's house to help her settle in after a recent minor surgery. After I got home, I did what I always do. I sent her a quick text. Made it home safe. Love you. I didn't get a reply, which was unusual. But I figured she had dozed off early or was deep in conversation with her grandmother. I shrugged it off and went about my evening. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Chloe, and her voice was trembling, laced with pure panic. "Someone tried to break in," she gasped, trying to catch her breath. She assured me they were safe. The police had arrived before the man could get inside. My heart pounded as I asked her to tell me everything. This is the story she told me, pieced together from her account and her grandmother's story. Her grandmother, Eleanor, had returned from a church potluck around 10:30 p.m. Chloe was helping her unload groceries from the car parked in the driveway. The suburban street was silent and poorly lit. As Chloe reached into the trunk for the last few bags, a primal sense of being watched came over her. She turned around. Standing directly behind her, no more than 3 feet away, was a young man in his early 20s. He had been standing there in complete silence for what Chloe estimated was half a minute, just watching her. The most chilling part was his face. It was fixed with a wide, unnerving, ear-to-ear grin. He didn't speak or make a move. He just loomed over her, smiling. Chloe screamed. She and her grandmother dropped the grocery bags and sprinted for the front door, slamming it shut and locking it behind them. Peering through the window, they saw the man, utterly unfazed, begin to methodically rummage through the car, as if searching for something valuable. This went on for a nerve-shredding 5 minutes as Chloe spoke to a 911 dispatcher. Then he approached the house. He didn't pound on the door. He calmly rang the doorbell and followed it with a polite knock. In a calm, conversational tone, he said, "I know you. I just want to talk." All the while, that same grotesque smile was plastered on his face. What he did next was bizarre and deeply unsettling. He didn't try to force his way in. Instead, he lay down horizontally on the welcome mat in front of the door, folded his hands on his chest, and appeared to fall asleep. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers arrived. The officers arrested the man without incident. While they took statements from a shaken Chloe and Eleanor, the young man sat in the back of a squad car. As Chloe looked over, she saw him staring directly at her through the window, his head tilted, still wearing that same unwavering ear-to-ear grin. The police car pulled away, its taillights disappearing down the street. The last thing Chloe saw was his pale face in the rear window, the smile still visible in the darkness. We never found out who he was or what he wanted. The police later said he was disoriented and couldn't give a coherent statement. I don't let myself think about what could have happened if Chloe had been alone, or if the police had taken just a few minutes longer to arrive. That silent, smiling face in the dark is a memory that still haunts us both. Scary Story 22. The 2 a.m. pizza delivery. 7 years ago, my family was living in a quiet, rural town in Indiana. Our lives were in that beautiful, exhausting haze that comes with a new baby. Our youngest, Noah, was just a few weeks old, and I was spending my nights on the downstairs sofa to manage his frequent feedings without disturbing my husband, David, and our 2 older children who were asleep upstairs. One night, I was jolted from a deep, sleep-deprived slumber by a sharp, insistent knocking on the front door. My mind, clouded with exhaustion, had one singular goal: get to the door before the noise woke the entire household. In my groggy state, it didn't even register how dangerous it could be to answer a door so late at night. As I shuffled toward the entrance, Noah began to stir and whimper in his bassinet. Without a second thought, I scooped him into my arms, his small head resting on my shoulder, and continued to the door. I opened it to find a man standing on my porch. The porch light was dim, casting long shadows across his face. "How can I help you?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep. For a moment, he just stood there, silent. The pause was just long enough for my foggy brain to start clearing, replaced by a prickle of anxiety. I could see him shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He seemed nervous, almost jittery, which in turn made my own pulse quicken. Finally, he spoke. His words rushed. "I'm sorry, I thought you ordered a pizza." Then, he turned, grabbed a flat cardboard pizza box from the small side table on my porch, a table several feet away from the door, and quickly walked off into the night. I don't even remember what I mumbled in response. I just closed the door, the lock clicking into place with a definitive thud. I stood there for a second, feeling disoriented. That was weird, I thought, trying to rationalize it. He just had the wrong house. But as I walked back into the living room, my eyes fell on the digital clock on the DVD player. The glowing red numbers made my stomach plummet. It was 2:07 a.m. A cold wave of realization washed over me. There were no pizza places in our town, or even in the neighboring one, that delivered past 11 p.m. I rushed back to the window and peered through the blinds. The street was completely deserted. There were no cars, no taillights, no sign of the man whatsoever. I spent the next 20 minutes frantically checking and rechecking every lock on every door and window on the ground floor. As I sat back down on the sofa, holding my sleeping son a little tighter, the unsettling details replayed in my mind with terrifying clarity. The greeting: a real delivery driver leads with a rehearsed line and tells you the total. He only spoke to explain his presence after a strange silence. The box. He wasn't holding the pizza box when I opened the door. I would have seen it immediately. He grabbed it from the side table as he was leaving, as if he had placed it there beforehand. The uniform. I had no memory of him wearing a cap, a shirt, or a jacket with any restaurant logo. The only nearby chain was a Domino's, and they were always branded, head to toe. The time, nothing was open. I was absolutely certain of that. His nervous energy wasn't just social anxiety. It was the vibe of someone whose plan had been disrupted. I've often wondered what his true intention was that night. Perhaps the sudden bark of one of our dogs from deeper in the house deterred him. Or maybe, just maybe, the sight of a mother holding her vulnerable infant in her arms was enough to make him abandon whatever he had planned. Whenever I think of that night, a chill runs down my spine. I feel an immense, lingering gratitude that the only thing that was delivered was a warning, and that nothing more happened. Scary Story 23. The Smiling Man at the Window. This incident occurred last fall when I was 16 years old. I live with my parents in a quiet, suburban neighborhood in Ontario, Canada, a place known for its safety and low crime rate. One Friday night, my parents were out for the evening, and I was home alone with my best friend, Kyle. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. Kyle and I were upstairs in my room, immersed in a video game on my Xbox. After a couple of hours, our hunger got the better of us, and we decided to venture downstairs to the kitchen for snacks and drinks. This decision would turn out to be a critical mistake. I have always been somewhat paranoid about home invasions, a fear that feels irrational in our peaceful town, but felt very real to me that night. Before heading down, I grabbed my tactical flashlight and a collapsible baton I kept for peace of mind. The hallway upstairs was dark, the only light switch being 10 feet away at the top of the stairs. We moved cautiously. When we reached the bottom of the stairs, the main floor was pitch black. We fumbled in the darkness, our hands brushing against walls and furniture, stubbing our toes as we desperately searched for the kitchen light switch. After a minute that felt like an eternity, I found it and flooded the room with bright, fluorescent light. The light always made me feel safe. I let my guard down, placing the baton and flashlight on the kitchen table. As we headed to the refrigerator, that's when we heard it. A soft, persistent tap, 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 coming from the large window above the kitchen sink, about 15 feet across the room. My blood ran cold. Kyle and I exchanged a nervous glance. Our first, hopeful thought was that it was our neighbor Mark, an 18-year-old who sometimes thought it was funny to scare us. "Very funny, Mark," I called out, my voice tighter than I intended. The tapping didn't stop. It became more insistent. I gripped my baton so hard, my knuckles turned white. Then, without warning, a tremendous bang slammed against the window pane. So violent, I thought the glass would shatter. This was no prank. Pure, unadulterated terror took over. We dropped the sodas we were holding and bolted for the stairs. Taking them 2 at a time, we scrambled into my room, slamming the door shut and locking it with a frantic click. My heart was hammering against my ribs, like a trapped bird. I grabbed the portable home phone to call my dad's friend, a police officer who lived just a few houses down. The phone was dead, no dial tone. A fresh wave of panic seized me. We were trapped, cut off. Then I remembered. My dad kept a handgun secured in a lockbox under his bed. Gathering every ounce of courage, I slowly cracked my bedroom door open. The hallway was dark and silent. I sprinted to my parents' room, not daring to turn on a light, found the heavy lockbox and the small key taped nearby, and sprinted back to the safety of my room. Locking the door again, my hands were shaking uncontrollably as I fumbled with the key, finally unlocking the case. I pulled out the semi-automatic pistol, loaded the magazine with a loud click, and racked the slide, chambering around. As I stood up, I glanced out my bedroom window, which offered a view of the side yard. He was there. A man, his face pale in the darkness, was staring directly into my room. And he was smiling. A wide, unnerving grin that didn't reach his eyes. My blood turned to ice. Kyle and I screamed at him simultaneously. "Get the hell off our property! We have guns!" I raised the pistol, pointing it directly at the window. My aim wavered wildly. My hand was shaking so badly, I knew I'd never hit him. The light was on in my room, so he could see the weapon clearly. For a horrifying second, he just stood there, smiling. Then he turned and sprinted, vanishing into the dense tree line that bordered our property. When my parents returned, we told them everything. Their faces drained of color. They immediately called the police. A week later, the police contacted us. They had arrested a man breaking into another house in a neighboring town. During the subsequent investigation, he was linked to a violent stabbing of a woman who lived alone. He later confessed to multiple unsolved homicides. The police asked me to come in for an identification procedure. I recognized him immediately. It was the same man, the one with the terrifying smile. In the aftermath, my father, shaken to his core, purchased a secure, quick-access safe for my room and helped me obtain a license for a personal firearm. He drilled into me the gravity of its use. It sits in that safe now, a heavy, silent promise of protection. I pray every day that I will never, ever have to use it. The memory of that smiling face is a chilling reminder of how quickly safety can shatter. Scary story. 24. The hiss in the parking lot. Some memories are seared into your mind with such vivid, painful clarity that they feel like they happened yesterday. This is one of mine. I was 6 years old, living with my mother in a suburb of Chicago. One evening, we made a routine trip to our local Target to pick up groceries. We parked in a remote section of the lot, and as we walked toward the brightly lit entrance, I saw him, a disheveled man stationed near the automatic doors, asking every passerby for spare change. Just before we reached him, he asked a woman in front of us. When she politely declined, he scoffed and muttered a stream of harsh, guttural words under his breath. My mother, sensing his agitation, tightened her grip on my hand, and we hurried past him into the safety of the store. The shopping trip was normal, but as we loaded the bags into our car, my mother did something that surprised me. She pulled 2 $1 bills from her wallet. "We'll give him this on the way out," she said softly. "Maybe it will help, and we can just be on our way." As we approached the entrance again, a primal fear gripped me. I raised my arms to my mother, the universal signal of a scared child wanting to be held. She understood immediately, scooping me up onto her hip. We walked out. Before the man could even speak, my mother extended her arm and placed the money into his hand. "God bless," she said, and we continued walking without breaking stride. I was nestled against her shoulder, my head facing backward, watching the receding storefront. We were about halfway across the parking lot when I looked directly at the man. He was no longer looking at the money or the other people. He was staring straight at me. His face was contorted into the most sinister expression I have ever witnessed, before or since. It was a mask of pure malevolence. His lips were pulled back into a grotesque smile, and his tongue, impossibly long and pointed, lolled out, stretching down almost to his chest. He let out a long, sharp hiss, a sound that was both airless and piercing. As he did this, his eyes rolled back into his head until only the whites were visible, stark against his grimy skin. The most chilling part was the silence that surrounded him. Other shoppers passed by, completely oblivious, as if they were watching a different scene entirely. And despite the 30-yard distance between us, I heard that hiss as clearly as if his lips were pressed against my ear. A venomous whisper meant for me alone. I buried my face in my mother's neck, trembling. We never spoke of it. To this day, I know the easy explanation is that he was a deeply troubled man, likely under the influence of drugs. But my 6-year-old soul, and the adult I've become, believes something else. I believe we encountered something not of this world. A demon wearing a human skin whose mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the horror beneath. That single moment in a Target parking lot has forever shaped my belief in the paranormal. A chilling reminder that true evil doesn't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes it stands right under the fluorescent lights, waiting for you to see it. Scary Story 25, The Basement Room. In the summer of 2012, I was a 19-year-old preparing for my sophomore year at a university about an hour from my hometown. I needed to find a rental room, and after weeks of fruitless searching, my mother, ever the helper, took over the hunt. She excitedly called me about a listing she found on a local classified site. A room for just $350 a month, utilities included, in a house just a short bus ride from campus. The homeowner, a man named Robert, had posted the ad. It stated that he rented the upstairs rooms to female students while he lived in the finished basement, emphasizing that he rarely saw his tenants, as he had his own kitchen and entrance. He specifically preferred female roommates, the ad explained, due to past issues with male tenants partying and causing property damage. Despite the low price, my mother was optimistic. "It's a great neighborhood, and he sounds very responsible," she said. We scheduled a viewing. The house was in a quiet, well-kept suburban neighborhood. Robert, a man in his late 40s with a calm demeanor, answered the door. He was polite and welcoming. The main floor was impeccably clean and tastefully furnished. My mother, a natural conversationalist, immediately struck up a friendly dialogue with him, while I hung back, quietly assessing my potential new home. "Let me show you the room," Robert said cheerfully. I assumed we were heading upstairs to join the other roommates. Instead, he opened a door off the main hallway and led us down a narrow flight of stairs into the basement. The air was cooler, and the lighting was dim. He opened another door to reveal a small, stark bedroom. It was just big enough for a single bed and a small dresser. There was no closet. Most alarmingly, there was no window, and the door had no lock. "This would be your space," he stated. "You'd share the bathroom just down this hall with me." He gestured to an open doorway across the hall, through which I could see the foot of a bed. His bedroom had no door. My internal alarm bells were clanging. This was not what was advertised. I tried to catch my mother's eye, but she was still engrossed in conversation with him. He then led us upstairs, showing us 3 other bedrooms with their doors open. "These are all occupied by lovely young women," he said, before launching into detailed, unflattering stories about them. One had a drinking problem. Another was dealing with a stalker ex-boyfriend. As he captivated my mother with these elaborate tales, I took the opportunity to investigate. I slipped away from the conversation and peered into each room. They were furnished with generic, dark wood furniture, a bed, a nightstand, a lamp, but they were sterile, devoid of life. I slid open the closet doors. Every one was completely empty, except for one, which held a small collection of men's shirts and trousers pushed to one side. The bathrooms were spotless, with only a bar of soap on the sink. There were no toothbrushes, no makeup, no towels. In one bedroom, an empty suitcase lay open on the neatly made bed. My skin crawled. There were no other tenants. I hurried back to the landing and began descending the stairs, forcing my mother and Robert to follow me back to the living room. It was then that Robert, recalling my mother's earlier mention of their upcoming vacation, made his move. "Since your parents will be away next week," he said, his eyes fixed on me, "you should come over for dinner. You can meet the other girls and see how you all get along." I forced a smile and agreed, desperate to leave. The moment we were in the car, I turned to my mother. "I am never setting foot in that house again. I said, my voice shaking. She was astonished, convinced he was just a nice, if slightly eccentric man, offering a great deal. I had to lay out the evidence like a detective. The bait and switch with the basement prison cell, the shared bathroom with a doorless bedroom, and the glaring fact that the other tenants were complete fabrications. He had given us a tour of empty rooms, spinning lies to create a false sense of security. My mother still resisted, so I had to enlist my stepfather. When he heard the story, his face turned grim. Under no circumstances is she going anywhere near that man or that house, he stated firmly. That finally convinced her. By the time we tried to report the fraudulent online listing, it had already been deleted. Years later, I recounted this story to a friend in law enforcement. Her expression turned serious. She explained that the setup was a classic tactic used by predators involved in sex trafficking. The isolated basement room was a holding cell. The fictional roommates were a lure to make a single young woman feel safe. The dinner invitation was almost certainly the planned point of abduction. The reality of how close I came to becoming a statistic still haunts me. My story is a warning to always trust your instincts, to look past a cheap price and a friendly smile, and to see the terrifying truth that can hide in a windowless room. Scary Story 26. The Banging in Cell B6. The experience that still haunts me began in November of 2019. By then, I'd been a corrections officer at the county detention center for over 2 years, and I thought I was accustomed to the grim rhythm of night shifts. To understand, you need to picture the layout. Each floor of the jail is designed like a square. In the center is the bubble, a fortified glass-walled control room, where officers manage the doors and monitor the 7 inmate pods that radiate out from it. Each pod contains 12 cells, designed for 2 inmates each. Access to the entire floor is through a massive, motorized steel door known as the main slider. I was assigned to a general population floor, typically housing non-violent offenders, people in for drug possession, petty theft, or public intoxication. It was usually a quiet shift. That night, like every other, I began my routine. I secured all the pods for lockdown, conducted the head count, and retreated to the bubble. All was quiet. An hour later, I completed my first hourly block check. Inmates were sleeping or reading. It was uneventful. The moment I sat back down in the bubble's chair, a jarring sound echoed through the concrete hall. The unmistakable, metallic crash of someone kicking a cell door. I was on my feet instantly, sweeping my flashlight beam through the pod's windows. I traced the disturbance to cell 6 in B pod. Inside, one inmate was frantic, pounding on the door and screaming that his cellmate was seizing. I rushed in and found the other man on the floor, his body convulsing, a pink, foamy substance bubbling from his lips. He was taking agonal breaths, the ragged, reflexive gasps of a dying man. We called a medical emergency. He was rushed out, but I learned later he was declared dead before reaching the hospital. The official cause, a drug-filled package he had swallowed before booking, had ruptured inside him. It was a tragic, but not unheard of, occurrence. I filed the necessary reports, and life moved on. The next night, I was assigned to the same floor. The routine was identical. Lockdown, head count, retreat to the bubble. And again, the very second I went to sit down, a sound ripped through the silence. Bang, bang, bang. 3 loud, deliberate impacts coming from B-Pod. I was back on my feet, flashlight in hand. I scanned the pod. Every inmate was in their bunk, many of them now sitting up, looking as confused as I was. I saw nothing. I returned to the bubble, unsettled. Then, 3 more bangs. This time, I checked the touchscreen control panel. An alert was flashing, indicating activity at a cell door. It was cell B6, the very cell where the inmate had died the night before. The cell was supposed to be empty and sealed for investigation. My training kicked in, suggesting a mechanical fault. I went to the cell, unlocked it, and pushed the heavy door open. The small space was utterly vacant, the bunk stripped bare. I closed and relocked it, then headed back to the bubble to call maintenance. I was on the phone, explaining the situation, when I heard it. The solid, thunderous slam of cell B6's door shutting on its own. A cold dread washed over me. I walked back out, my footsteps echoing in the now silent pod. The inmates were all at their windows. "What's going on, CO?" one of them asked, his voice uneasy. I had no answer for them. I had no answer for myself. The banging did not return. When maintenance arrived, they found no malfunction in the door's locking mechanism or its hydraulics. Nothing could explain what had happened. The following morning, I went straight to my watch supervisor and requested a permanent transfer. With a new class of rookies just assigned, he granted it. I've been on a different floor for over 2 years now. I still hear things occasionally. Footsteps when the bubble is empty, a faint tap on the glass. But nothing as violent, as deliberate, as the banging from that empty cell. Some memories and some sounds refuse to stay locked down. Scary Story 27, The Supermarket Stalkers. 8 years ago, on a bustling Saturday morning, I was running errands at a large supermarket in a suburban shopping center. I was 36 at the time, and the store was packed with weekend shoppers. I joined a checkout line, second in queue, behind a young family, a mother and father diligently unloading their cart, and their small daughter, who was sitting in the cart's child seat, facing me. Almost immediately, a profound sense of unease settled over me. 2 men had lined up directly behind me, standing uncomfortably close, invading my personal space. It was that primal feeling of being watched, a chill you feel before you even see the source. I focused on the little girl in front of me. She looked visibly distressed, shrinking into herself and repeatedly glancing over her shoulder at her father with wide, fearful eyes. Confused, I turned slightly and saw the two men behind me, smiling and waving at her, trying to capture her attention. Then, one of the men reached right around me and touched the girl's shoe. He did it with a casual familiarity that made me think for a second he might be a relative. But the girl flinched violently, pulling her foot away and whispering a single, terrified word, "Daddy." Her father spun around. "What do you think you're doing?" he boomed, his voice cutting through the store's noise. "Don't touch my daughter." The man who had touched her simply smiled and said, "We just want to be friends." "I don't know you. Back off," the father commanded. In that moment, any doubt vanished. These were strangers, and their intentions were sinister. A protective, maternal instinct surged through me. I shifted my position, placing my body like a shield between the two men and the little girl, completely blocking their line of sight. Incredibly, one of them tried to lean around me to see her again. Speaking loudly and clearly to the girl, I said, "You are so lucky to have such a brave and strong daddy. Look how he's protecting you from these bad men." Her father met my eyes, and a silent understanding passed between us. They finished their transaction with hurried efficiency and left the store, the mother clutching her daughter tightly. I thought the ordeal was over, but as I began unloading my own cart, which was heavy with a 35-pound bag of dog food, I felt a malevolent gaze. One of the men had moved. He was now standing at the end of the checkout lane, near the bagging area, staring at me with pure, undiluted hatred. The other man remained behind me, trapping my cart between us. A cold fear shot through me. I am a tall, strong woman, but in that moment, I felt vulnerable. My adrenaline spiked, and I knew I had to project unshakable strength. I locked eyes with the man at the end of the counter. Without breaking his gaze, I reached into my cart, gripped the massive bag of dog food, and lifted it onto the conveyor belt, as if it weighed nothing. My face was a mask of cold, impassive anger. The fear had been burned away by a fierce determination. He stared back, his expression unwavering. After I paid, he deliberately stepped into my path as I tried to exit the lane. I didn't hesitate. I pushed my cart forward, bumping it firmly into his legs. He let out a low, menacing laugh and finally moved aside. Knowing I couldn't lead them to my car, I didn't head for the exit. Instead, I walked deeper into the shopping center. A quick glance confirmed my worst fear. They were following me, and now a third man had joined them. They weren't even trying to be discreet. One of them made a horrifyingly clear gesture, dragging his finger across his throat. That was the final straw. I walked directly to the security desk. The moment I arrived and turned around, the three men had vanished into the crowd. I filed a detailed report, and the security team recommended I also informed the supermarket's management so they could review the CCTV footage from the checkout lane. A guard escorted me to my car, and I took a long, circuitous route home, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. I never saw those men again, while their high prices and my dog's picky eating habits were the official reasons I stopped shopping there. The memory of that day, the brazen harassment, the threatening gesture, and the chilling thought that I may have interrupted a potential kidnapping is what truly kept me away. Scary Story 28. The Men in White. I was 14 years old, living in a secluded, wooded community in rural Georgia. It was a place where everyone knew each other, and the darkness at night was absolute, broken only by the moon. My memory is often foggy, but the events of that summer night are burned into my mind with perfect, horrifying clarity. I believe this memory will haunt me for the rest of my life. I often went for late-night walks, sometimes with my friend Chloe, but that night, I went alone. Impatient, I left about 15 minutes earlier than my usual 9 p.m. start time. A small decision that now feels monumentally significant. Even in the summer heat, I pulled on a black hoodie. I was a small kid for my age, and the hoodie helped me stay hidden from the lax, unfriendly security patrols. More importantly, it concealed the small folding knife I kept tucked in my sleeve. The park was my usual destination. It was an old, neglected place with a creaky swing set, rotting picnic tables, and a rusted metal slide. A main road ran in front of it, and a smaller access road ran along its side, separated by a thin line of trees. I sat on a swing, lost in my thoughts, when a favorite song of mine came through my headphones. I began to sing aloud, forgetting my surroundings. A habit I reserved for this isolated spot. A sudden movement on the main road made my blood run cold. A figure was walking at an unnerving pace, almost a run, about 100 feet away. My first fluttering fear was that they had heard me sing, but that was quickly replaced by a deeper, more primal dread. Something was wrong. I scanned the area, but saw no one else. The person passed the park without a glance, and I breathed a sigh of relief. After a few more minutes of singing, I decided to head home, but a persistent, gnawing feeling of being watched settled in the pit of my stomach. I even thought I saw a shape moving behind the tree line, but dismissed it as a deer. I left the park and turned onto the main road. That's when I saw him again. The same man was now walking onto the main road from the side access road. My heart hammered against my ribs. I immediately crossed to the far side of the street to avoid passing him directly. He reached the intersection before me and stopped. As I passed, I risked a glance under the dappled moonlight. He looked normal. Terrifyingly normal. He was of average height, wearing a pristine white baseball cap pulled low, and a clean, pure white polo shirt. There wasn't a speck of dirt on him. In the gloom of the forest road, his clothes seemed to almost glow, giving him an ethereal, ghost-like quality. He was just standing there, watching me. I tried to act casual, pretending to look at the woods while tracking him in my peripheral vision. Once I was about 15 feet past him, I glanced back. My stomach plummeted. He had turned and was now following me. The pieces clicked together with horrifying speed. I'd been singing for 10 minutes after he first passed. What if he hadn't been visiting anyone? What if the shape I saw in the trees was him, watching me the entire time? He began to close the distance between us. My grip tightened on the knife in my sleeve. I was only halfway home, and a pre-existing ankle injury meant I couldn't outrun him. My only option was to keep a steady, quick pace and pray for a miracle. Then I saw headlights. A car was approaching slowly, navigating the animal-prone road. As it drew nearer, I recognized it. It was Mr. Evans, Chloe's dad. I tried to signal him discreetly, but he just gave a friendly wave and drove past. My hope shattered. But he had done exactly what I needed without realizing it. As his headlights swept over the man flinched back, crossing to the other side of the road. For a precious 5 seconds, he was blinded. I didn't run. I walked as fast as I could, without making noise, not breaking into a sprint until I rounded the next corner and was out of his line of sight. I rushed to my house, locked the door behind me, and knew I wasn't safe yet. I did something that probably sounds stupid, but it likely saved me. I texted Chloe, "Meet me outside right now. Something happened. I need to come over." The second I saw her in her driveway, I sprinted across the space between our homes. Inside, breathless, I told her everything. Right as I finished, her dad walked in. He looked shaken. "I was just about to tell you to ask her to come over," he said to Chloe, his voice tight. He then looked at me. "I saw him. The man following you. He was pretending to be on a phone, but he wasn't holding anything." Then he delivered the final, chilling blow. He wasn't alone. There is a secured gate at the entrance to our community that requires a keycard. Mr. Evans told us he had seen a second man, dressed similarly in white, standing by a van just outside that gate. They weren't residents. They didn't want to be logged by security. They were waiting with a getaway vehicle for the first man to bring them what or who he had come for. I spent the night at Chloe's house. I have never been more terrified in my life, and I often wonder what would have happened if I had left for my walk at my usual time, or if Mr. Evans hadn't chosen that exact moment to drive home. Some questions are better left unanswered. Scary Story 29, The Winter Takedown. During my senior year of high school, I lived with my family in a remote mountain town in Colorado, a tight-knit community of just over 1,000 people. Every February, the town held its annual Winter Festival Gala. It was the social event of the year, an adults-only dinner and show at the town hall where locals performed skits roasting the past year's events. For every teenager in town, especially the girls aged 13 to 17, this meant one thing: babysitting was in high demand. My two best friends, Jake and Leo, and I, all 17, had a different idea. Since you had to be 18 to attend the gala, and there wasn't a taxi service for 50 miles, we started our own unofficial shuttle service. We spent the evening driving neighbors to and from the party, earning some cash and killing time. After a couple of hours of ferrying people, we found ourselves in one of the older neighborhoods, a quiet area nestled against the base of a steep, pine-covered ridge. The houses were spaced far apart, and the only light came from weak, orange floodlamps. We were driving slowly, as one of the mothers we'd given a ride to earlier, a widow named Sarah with 3 young kids, lived there. Her 15-year-old niece was babysitting. It was around 10 p.m. The night was bitterly cold, and a fresh blanket of snow covered everything. As we cruised down the street, Jake, who was in the passenger seat, suddenly sat up straight. "Whoa, did you see that? Something moved in the Johnson's garden." We dismissed it as a dog or a deer and continued to the other end of town. But Leo, in the back, grew quiet. "Guys, I've got a bad feeling," he said. "We should go back. Let's just check for footprints or something." A sense of unease settled over us. We turned the car around. When we got back to the neighborhood, we parked a few houses down and quietly approached the widow's property. Peering over the low fence, our blood ran cold. There, clearly visible in the pristine snow, was a trail of fresh, adult-sized footprints. We exchanged a single grim look and decided to follow them. The trail was methodical and chilling. It led past every bedroom window, with distinct prints turning directly toward each pane of glass, as if someone had stopped to peer inside. The trail eventually led back to the plowed road, where it disappeared. We huddled for a quick, frantic debate. Should we go get the mom from the party, or ring the doorbell and scare the babysitter? Since the footprints never approached the doors, we devised a plan. Jake, our driver, would go to the police station and pick up Sarah on the way back. Leo and I would stay behind, hidden, to watch the house. It was the best decision we ever made. Only 5 minutes after Jake left, we saw him. A figure emerged from behind a garage, 2 houses down, a glowing cigarette tip betraying his position. He stood motionless for a moment, then dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his boot, and began creeping towards Sarah's house. He went straight for the back door. Without a word, Leo and I burst from our hiding spot. We sprinted through 2 adjacent backyards, our boots crunching through the snow. We reached the corner of the house just as the man was working on the back door lock. "What are you doing?" Leo shouted, his voice cutting through the silent night. The man froze for a split second, then turned and fled. Adrenaline took over. We gave chase. He was fast, bolting down the street to build momentum. Leo and I were both varsity track athletes, and we began to gain on him. All I could think was, don't slip, don't lose him. The street ended in a sharp 90-degree turn. Seeing an opportunity, I launched myself off the road, cutting across a snowbank to intercept him as he slowed for the turn. My calculation was wrong. He took the corner without losing speed. I was exhausted, my lungs burning, and still 10 meters behind. But Leo was closer. With a final, powerful surge, he dove forward, kicking the man's feet out from under him. It was the quickest, most brutal takedown I've ever witnessed. The man flew forward, smashing his head against the frozen ground with a sickening thud. He lay completely still. We rolled him onto his back. He was breathing, but it was shallow and wet. A crackling, gurgling sound coming from his throat. Panic set in. What if he dies? What if this was all a mistake? While I watched him, Leo, thinking quickly, checked his pockets. What he found confirmed our worst fears. A tube of lubricant, a bottle of powerful sedatives, and a broken digital camera. Minutes felt like hours before we heard the welcome sound of sirens. Jake arrived with Sarah and 2 police officers, followed shortly by an ambulance. The man was loaded onto a stretcher, unconscious. The next day, we were questioned at the police station. The police chief informed us that the man was a known, violent pedophile from another state. He then looked at us sternly. So, you're saying you chased him, and while he was fleeing, he tripped and fell, hitting his head? Is that correct? He paused his typing and looked at each of us, a soft, knowing smile on his face. The way I see it, 3 local heroes caught a burglar in the act, and during his escape, the criminal tragically fell. Isn't that right? We nodded silently. The man survived, but the fall caused severe brain bleeding. We later learned he would require full-time care for the rest of his life. The most chilling part, the detail that still gives me nightmares, is the planning involved. He knew about the festival. He knew she was a single mom. He had chosen his target, his timing, and his tools with meticulous, predatory precision. We didn't just stop a crime that night. We likely saved multiple young lives. Scary Story 30. The Visitor in the Doorway. It was a Tuesday night in our small, 900-square-foot apartment in a quiet complex bordering a dense forest in upstate New York. I was asleep in our bedroom with my Boston Terrier, Bruno, curled up at my feet. My husband, Mark, was on the living room couch, immersed in a video game. The faint, rhythmic sounds of gunfire and explosions from the TV were a familiar white noise. I was jolted awake by a sound, a loud, sharp crack that echoed through the silent apartment. It was the kind of sound a heavy sheet of plywood would make if it were dropped onto a tile floor. I sat bolt upright. So did Bruno. My bedroom was laid out in an unusual, angular shape. The doorway was recessed, forming a sort of irregular alcove before opening into the hall. As I strained my eyes in the pitch blackness, the large bedroom window offered no light, facing only the deep, light-absorbing woods. I looked toward the door, intending to investigate the noise. That's when I saw him. A figure was standing in the sunken doorway, perfectly silhouetted in the frame. My sleep-addled brain tried to rationalize it. "Mark?" I said, my voice thick with sleep. "Is that you?" There was no answer. The figure took a step forward, out of the alcove and into the room proper. That's when the first true prickle of fear traced its way down my spine. This wasn't Mark. This was a man I didn't know. And he was impossibly tall, at least 7 feet, forcing him to hunch his shoulders slightly under the standard 8-foot ceiling. He wore what looked like ordinary clothes, a t-shirt, jeans, and a baseball cap. But it was all just dark, featureless shapes in the gloom. Bruno saw him, too. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, a sound I'd never heard him make before. Then, the cliché that is all too real washed over me, an overwhelming, suffocating sense of dread. It poured over me like ice water, replacing curiosity with a raw, primal adrenaline surge. Bruno's confirmation snapped me into survival mode. My mind raced. I shot a glance at the bathroom door, but I knew I couldn't reach it in time. This giant of a man was blocking the only exit. He was taking up all the space, all the air in the room. Bruno stood on the bed beside me, his barking now a frantic, sharp alarm. Terror seized my vocal cords. "Who are you?" I screamed, my voice shrill. "What are you doing in my room?" He didn't answer. He just kept moving forward, his arms held out slightly from his body, bowed and tense. His posture was predatory, like a wrestler closing in for a takedown. A new, horrifying thought struck me. Mark hadn't come running. How could this intruder have gotten past my husband in the next room without a struggle? The only logical conclusion was that he had already hurt Mark, and I was next. A fierce, defiant anger rose through the fear. He's going to have to overkill me, I thought, because I am not going down without a fight. I started screaming for help. For the neighbors, for anyone. The man was silent, a looming, menacing shadow, now just a few feet from the bed. I was sizing him up, thinking I might be able to kick out his knees and make a break for it. And I began to shift my weight to get a better position. Suddenly, light. The bedroom door flew open, and Mark burst in, flipping the overhead light switch. "What's going on?" he yelled, his eyes wild as he scanned the room for an intruder. And I tell you this, without a hint of exaggeration, the 7-foot-tall man did not run or hide. He dissolved. Right before my eyes, he slowly faded from existence. It wasn't an instant disappearance. It was a gradual dissipation, like watching a dense, three-dimensional mist evaporate. I could see the pattern on his shirt, a dull, rusty orange color, and the blank, featureless space where his face should have been. His hand, stretched out to grab me, became transparent, and I could see my bewildered husband through his fading form. And then he was simply gone. I was left shaking uncontrollably, sobbing, trying to explain the impossible to a husband who was convinced I'd had a night terror. The police were even called by a concerned neighbor, and I had to humiliatingly explain that my nightmare had prompted the emergency call. But I know what I saw. I know the difference between a dream and wakefulness. Bruno saw it too. I was so terrified that I trembled for hours. A physiological reaction to fear I have never experienced before or since. For years after that, I couldn't sleep alone in a room. The most chilling part, the description of what my son saw years later. The misty, transparent figures he played with haunts me with its familiarity. I don't know what visited our home that night, but I know it was real. To those who wander in the shadows until the final whisper, thank you. Thank you for allowing my words to be the quiet voice in the stillness of your night. There's a strange and beautiful magic in the way we choose to explore the darkness together, isn't there? A silent pact between storyteller and listener, bound by a shared curiosity for what lies just beyond the light. I hope the tales we unraveled tonight found a home in your imagination. I hope they provided that perfect haunting shiver, the kind that reminds you you're thrillingly alive. This shared space exists because of you. Your presence transforms these narratives from mere stories into a collective, whispered experience. I will return when the clock next chimes this late hour, carrying new secrets to share. I would be honored if you chose to meet me here again.